Good morning. It's 3 minutes after 10. Did you have a splendid weekend? I hope you did. I'm going to start the show a little differently today. I can't do this every day, obviously, because sometimes in that little 60-second slot that I enjoy at the end of Nick's show, I tell you, or I give you an indication of what is going to be coming up after the news. And then during the news, I change my mind. So sometimes my inbox will be full of texts that are not relevant to the conversation that I have very unprofessionally and unfairly decided to have at approximately 2 or 3 minutes past 10. But today I think it works. So Joseph's been in touch. He says it's ridiculous how Labour are failing to appeal to the young vote. They have an opportunity here and just seem to be gliding to victory. James in Oxford says, where is everyone? This is the limpest election ever. The Lib Dems have an open goal, take us back into the EU, work out all of our problems with our neighbours. Am I stupid? This is from Sue. We should be teaching younger people who say they're not interested in politics that every single aspect of their lives is politics. Tell those who say they will not vote that the most important thing is to get the Tories out, so vote tactically for the candidate most likely to beat them. Once they are gone, then the campaign starts to get proportional representation. Apathy is not an option, says Sue. Another, I think possibly the same Joseph. I'm a politics and economics graduate. I'm excited to vote, but my friends from all different backgrounds don't want to vote because they think Labour has already won. And good Lord, it's 5 minutes after 10 and we've already got an application for Idiot's Corner. Is that a record? Okay, how can you be getting into Idiot's Corner before I've even spoken? But Rickard has been in touch to say, are you actually going to ignore the European elections? Coward. Mate, my show hadn't started when you sent that. How could you possibly be accusing me of ignoring anything before I've actually started speaking? But anyway, you're in Idiot's Corner before 10 had even struck. So I guess that's a grounds for some form of congratulations. We may well have a look at the results of the European elections shortly. Disasters for Emmanuel Macron, calling an election, taking absolutely everybody by surprise. Arguably an even bigger shock to the French electorate. And indeed to Emmanuel Macron's colleagues than Rishi Sunak calling an election here turned out to be for his colleagues. Listen, there's a chance, isn't there, that you sympathise with young people who are not planning to vote. Claire puts it in a slightly different way from Campbelltown. I normally agree with much of what you say. Well, I can only advise that you seek medical help as soon as possible, Claire, if that is the case. But I find it startling that your response to the news of young people not voting is to give them a kick up the backside rather than putting your head in your hands that we haven't found candidates or parties able to offer them any hope for a better future. Thank you, Claire. I to be honest with you, if you hear that little crescendo at the end of the minute that I get at the end of Nick's show, if you hear that kicking in and it sounds like I don't know how I'm going to finish the sentence because I've just sort of been burbling in an unfocused fashion, then you're right. So sometimes I just find myself reaching for the finish line, dipping, to use an athletic, and congratulations to Dina Asher-Smith, dipping for the finish line, to use an athletics analogy, without really knowing where the finish line is. So give them a kick up the backside was a bit of a random reach for me, and it may well be that is the last thing that we need. What we really need is calm and cool explication of what this means. But let's look first at the numbers. Here's the shocking one, right? And the research was commissioned by the Duke of Edinburgh's Award, which is a wonderful scheme, truly, truly wonderful scheme. It saw one of mine actually at the Palace quite recently, which was an absolutely magical experience for all involved. But only 4 in 10 of those aged 18 to 24 said they are likely to cast their ballot next month. And the number saying they're not going to do so, or that they are unlikely to do so, is 18%. But if the numbers of those as yet undecided were to come to fruition on polling day, you would have less than half of young people. Arguably, the younger you are, the more important politics is. I know we often see it from the other end of the telescope in this country, because the older you are, the more likely you are to have savings, or the more likely you are to be seducible by pension policies. The older you are, the more likely you are to have a mortgage. So the more, in terms of the engineering of electoral offers, the more you've got in the game, the more skin you've got in the game, the longer you've been in the business, the more you have susceptible to the engineering. But if you think of it in broad brushstrokes, if you think of it in contextual terms, the younger you are, the more you have at stake, because this sets the tone for the next 5 years, possibly the next 10 or 15, who knows, possibly the next 2, given what we've learned in recent years about how flimsy, even quite big parliamentary majorities can prove to be for the party leaders, for the putative prime ministers. But the younger you are, the more you've got in play. The more it sets the tone for significant swathes of your life. So the fact that the youngest cohort of potential voters is currently the least likely to vote should give us all pause. It should give us all cause for concern. And that's where we'll begin. So we'll begin with the why of it. Why do you think this is? Or indeed, the problem I've got now is I'm probably not talking to many people in that age group who are thinking of not voting. I would hope, and this may be wrong, in which case you will soon and quickly tell me, I would hope that if you're listening to this programme, certainly this radio station, then you are probably politically engaged. You probably do have a level of interest sufficient to make you more likely to vote than not vote. But equally, I mean, if you are in this category, I am politically engaged, James, I am interested, but I don't think it's going to make much difference what I do. I'd be interested in hearing from you. Or I think the phrase that probably depresses me the most in modern politics is that they're all the same. And it depresses me for 2 reasons. The first is that it's not true. And the second is that it offers an opportunity to the racists, the people who are prepared to be publicly racist, who are prepared to talk about people of colour not understanding, quotes, our culture, end quotes. At which point I think you're supposed to say whatever the hell that means. But everybody honest knows exactly what that means. And in fact, quite a lot of dishonest people know what that means as well. If you're racist, you love it. If you're not racist, you hate it. And that's something that we may turn our attention to in the next hour. But the idea that you think all politicians are the same opens the door to the politicians who are not proper politicians, the ones who don't have to confine themselves to the parameters of reality, the ones who can make promises that they will never be required to keep, the ones that can indulge in demagoguery and the lazy othering of communities. Most mainstream politicians have to work within the parameters of reality, and I guess sometimes, I know Brexit changed that a bit, but sometimes that may create the idea that there's no point voting because nothing's ever going to really change. These are the reasons given for not committing to a vote: the belief that it would not make any difference, not knowing enough about the parties, or finally, that parties could not be trusted to keep their promises. So there are 3 categories there, enjoying almost equal support from the cohort of young people minded currently not to vote, or more accurately, not currently minded to vote. It won't make any difference. I don't know enough about the parties, or the parties can't be trusted to keep their promises. So what reason have you got? 0345 6060 973. And then for the rest of us, well, we'll do it both ways round, shall we? If you're not aged 18 to 24, that can be a fairly fluid. We talked about this a couple of weeks ago, and it was absolutely fascinating. The question of, is it our fault? Is it somehow the fault of the media, the fault of adults, the fault of parents? How can we have such large numbers of young people in such an uncertain world, in a world where politics has made such enormous differences to their lives? I mean, just Brexit, I guess, because there's a great piece by Nesrine Malik in The Guardian today about nobody talking about Brexit. Maybe that's part of it. Even if you were politically engaged enough to understand the damage that's been done to your future by being part of the first population in the history of humanity to vote to impose economic sanctions on itself, there is nothing here, there's nothing in this election that offers you, shall we say, rescue or respite from the madness that's been inflicted upon you by the grown-ups. So that might be on the list. So, or it might just be that there's the less social capital you've got, the less likely you are to become a homeowner, the less likely you are to find a job of security, to find a job that provides you with the sort of security that you crave, the less likely you are to be politically engaged. If you haven't got enough of a stake in society to feel that society has a stake in you, then arguably simple question of voting seems largely irrelevant. I'd have thought that would be a bigger problem for the left than the right, but who knows? I mean, in fact, looking at where polling sits on support for the two major parties, and we'll talk about the others, of course, this morning, this is much worse news for the left wing, for the Labour Party, than it is for the Conservative Party, because support for the Conservative Party in some cohorts is down to about 8% among the youngest. It's coming up to 10:14. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Coming up later on the programme, we'll look at the legacy of Michael Mosley, that extraordinary tragedy which has captured the imagination of the entire country. And the more you learn about Michael Mosley, and for me, I wasn't a fully paid up member of his fan club, the more you realise that his influence, his impact on the population of this country is close to unparalleled. You can actually say, as you mourn his tragic passing, you can actually say that this is someone who changed countless lives. You can do a radio phone in. In fact, I think we probably will now, I come to think about it, asking how Michael Mosley changed your life. I heard Tom Watson this morning, the former deputy leader of the Labour Party, crediting him with pretty much saving his life, certainly steering him back from type 2 diabetes. And that's a heavy example. There are little examples as well. We'll get into that. And we'll have a look at what it's like as a person of colour, as a British person of colour, to have once again in public discourse the nudge, wink suggestion that you're not really British if you're brown, which Nigel Farage has ushered back into the mainstream over the course of this weekend. But we begin with the troubling statistic that only 4 in 10 of those aged 18 to 24 are likely to vote next month. Question 1 is why? Question 2 is what can we do about it? 0345 6060 973. 10:17 is the time. Would you like to play a game? I have 2 clips. You know how much we collate. We enjoy curating clips on this programme. That makes us sound very fancy. We don't just play them out or collect them. We curate our clips. We have a curated collection of clips. I am conscious of political paranoia when I talk about my curated collection of clips, but obviously my fondness for alliteration overcomes any reservations that I have. I've got 2 clips, one featuring Richard Holden and one featuring Esther McVeigh. If you're familiar with them, why don't you have a vote on which one you think I should play out? Bracket, spoiler alert, I'm going to play both of them anyway, but we can pretend that we're having a radio competition or a sort of tension-building exercise. I know which one I found most remarkable, but I shall let you have little votes on that. We begin, though, with young people voting and the failure of the former, apparently, to recognise the importance of the latter, or possibly the failure of the rest of us to understand why it is not important, or not as important as we think it should be for younger voters. Alex is in Southampton. Alex, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. Nice to be on your show. I'm a big fan.
Thank you.
I'm 19. I'm sort of fairly politically engaged. And I think what's happening is I know quite a lot of people who are sort of similarly politically leaning as me, but do fall into the category of, as you said, sort of Labour and the Tories are the same. And so also as a result of this, they think that, you know, voting Green or Lib Dem might not make a difference anyway. And that tends to be what the angle that I'm seeing is.
Well, I'm most interested, I think, in the notion of them being the same. Because I do this for a living. I've been doing it for 20 years. And there's clearly quite a lot of clear blue water between the two parties at the moment, possibly not as much as there has been in the past. But is it because of the personalities rather than the policies? They just see politicians in the media never really answering quite questions directly or dancing on a pinhead or walking a tightrope, and that creates an idea that all the people are the same and therefore the parties are, or am I reaching for the stars?
I think that's definitely an aspect of it. I mean, I agree with you. I think the differences are very, very clear. I think potentially a lot of it is that for example, the Greens sort of do tend to put themselves, or at least advertise themselves as being, you know, a third party. I think. Yes,
they don't agitate as if they are pursuing power, and when the Liberal Democrats do, it can often appear a little bit silly. I mean, I don't know if you even remember Jo Swinson, but I think she was the last Liberal Democrat leader to suggest that she was poised to become Prime Minister, and I doubt even many Lib Dem activists believe that. What do you say to them, if indeed you do bother? I've probably got more exciting things to do, to try to shake them into action?
Well, I mean, I think basically just sort of actually, when, for example, Labour policy gets announced, just sort of trying to make sure as many people are aware of it. I mean, I think last week, sort of the announcement that recognising Palestine pretty early on would be in the manifesto was quite a good way of doing this, and sort of, I think again that tends to be an area where people view Labour and Tory policy as too similar, maybe.
Well, do you know, I'm going to put that on the list then. I mean, regardless, because that should be dismaying to everybody that supports either of the two main parties, and you've reminded us of the relevance of the other parties as well in this context. But if you are a dyed-in-the-wool Tory, admittedly, you've got to be clinging pretty desperately to the party apparatus at the moment, but things could easily get better in the course of the next few weeks. If you're a dyed-in-the-wool Tory or a fully paid-up member of the Labour movement, then the idea that your generation think the two parties are the same should be equally outrageous, shouldn't it? It should be equally affronting. Yeah. And so I'd ask them to tell young people what the differences are between the two main parties. Yeah. What should 19-year-olds like Alex's mates know about the two parties that constitutes clear blue water? Final question, I promise, because I'm sure you've got lectures to attend. What don't laugh. What is the likelihood of the people you're talking about not actually voting at all?
I think it ranges person to person. I mean, I remember. Even in the local elections, sort of people. I mean, obviously, the local elections are different, but quite often, I was sort of telling people, vote. I'm very much. Sure. I mean, I think compulsory voting should be a thing, but that's another topic. But
that's a conversation for another day, and it may be. I mean, the excitement of voting. I took my 18-year-old to the polling station for the first time during the council elections, and there is a magic to it. I know it's a little bit naff, perhaps, but in the shadow of D-Day, particularly, you remind people of the importance of democracy. Of course, in the shadow of some of the results that have come in the European elections over the last 24 hours, you wonder whether some voters on the continent were aware of what it was we were actually celebrating the defeat of last week, or at least the imminent defeat of, as opposed to reintroducing policies or reintroducing ideas to continental Europe that were seen off by the D-Day heroes. 23 after 10 is the time. Alex, take care. Jack's in Hartlepool. Jack, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
First
Jack.
time caller. Lovely to hear from you.
Welcome.
Thank you very much. So basically, I'm 19, and my friend group spans to about 15, like others of us, and I'm the only one who's actually politically inclined. The only one actively looking into politics. And when I actually ask them about this exact thing, the main reason that they give is, well, there's two reasons. The first one is they don't have to, so they don't really feel inclined to. Yeah. So I don't know if maybe putting like a mandatory thing in would actually help.
The second 19-year-old, and I've only spoken to two this morning. Honestly, 19-year-olds are like buses, aren't they? You wait ages for. But the second one to talk about mandatory voting from that exact perspective that people almost need to be compelled to exercise their democratic rights. That's really interesting. Go on. Sorry to interrupt. What was the next one?
No, that's fine. But the other reason is because the barrier for entry to sort of getting into politics, I feel like, is a bit too high. Because if you're a young person right now and you want to get into politics, there's no real starting point. I mean, you can look into each party specifically and their unique manifestos and things that they say, but there's guaranteed to be some grey lines there. And so whenever it comes to my friends and I ask them, who do you want to vote for on July 4th, they always get me to sort of try and speed them up on how politics has been within the last 10 or so years. I mean, they have no idea about, how long the Tories have been in and all of the stuff that they've done.
That's quite depressing,
genuinely?
Isn't it? No,
Yeah.
I believe you. I've got better things to do, I suppose. But, I mean, stuff like, there used to be, I can't remember whether it was an advert or whether it was a sketch when I was your age or a bit younger. And it was someone saying they don't care about politics. And then someone just lists all the things that are intrinsically politics. So, on a day like today, you could look at police numbers, you could look at class sizes, you could look at net zero, you could look at taxing banks more to put cash into the NHS, which is what the Liberal Democrats were talking to Nick about earlier. There's so much that is obviously politics. For your generation, you'd think about the likelihood of home ownership. Is it just that the dots are not generally connected?
A lot of it is, because it's sort of everything's everywhere. No one's telling them where to look first and what to sort of interpret from the things that they look at.
It's a media failure, possibly, then, a bit, is it? A media failure?
I suppose in some part, but I mean, there are definitely steps you can take. I mean, I've been reading your book myself. I got it for Christmas, and I think that's a brilliant read. But
what you're saying is that every 18-year-old in the country should be issued with a copy of How They Broke Britain before the general election. Every 18 to 24. I could not agree with you more, Jack. That is something that I think. What you need is a friendly billionaire to come along. Instead of setting up a weird television station, they could buy a copy of my book for every 18 to 24-year-old in the country, and then they'd all bloody vote.
Oh, exactly, James, exactly.
I appreciate that's not quite what you rang in to say, but, it's my job to précis what callers are in the process of sharing with me on some occasions. Speaking of which, in fact, at the other end of the scale, thank you, Jack. I would talk again. This is from Antrula, for which I say thank you, and I sense from your name that it would be more correct to say Efharisto. She says, "Morning, James. I love your programme. You make it easy to understand politics. I'm supposed to be working, but I'm texting you just to say that my son of 32 will not be voting as he believes that all politicians lie. I told him to listen to you. He said no. This is my first time contacting LBC." Andrew, that is almost a poem. That text. We did flirt with the idea last month of trying to turn one text a day into a haiku, didn't we? That's too long for me to do that, but there we go. I told him to listen to you. He said no. How do you reach Antrula's son? How do you help him understand that not all politicians are liars? I don't know, to be honest, but that tickled me pink. Thank you. 10:27 is the time. Corey is in Paddington. Corey, what would you like to say?
Well, I mean, good morning at the start.
Yes,
I do agree with yourself. We should give a copy of How They Broke Britain to every
I think we should probably stop this now. We're flirting with Ofcom regulations on self-promotion. No, don't worry. There's no such thing. I'm just doing false modesty, Corey. Yeah. Carry on.
I feel definitely, I'm 21, so I would have been just kind of starting, or at least the first half of my high school education when the Brexit referendum happened. Yeah. And I think kind of since definitely then, and across the pond in the US since Trump, the way media has become a lot more, it's a lot more polarized. It's also a lot more kind of distrusting of everyone in power. So
why is that, do you think? What do you think that is Brexit related, or?
I think in all fairness, if just a simple example would be the judges on the front of the Daily Mail. It's like a collection of people essentially trying to push some kind of populist agenda, which ends up with us trying to destroy all sorts of systems we have in place to protect things.
But this involves this involves a level of engagement. This would explain perhaps where you derive some of your convictions from. But people who aren't engaged at all, have they been alienated by populism? Have they been pushed out of the picture a bit?
I would think kind of as populism is going more and more towards kind of, at the beginning, if you go back and you think of what Trump was promising and what they were promising with the Leave campaign, it all seemed to be like populism, just simple solutions to really complex problems.
Yeah, I'd put Corbyn in that category as well, actually.
Oh yeah,
he did connect. He did connect with young people. Martin in Dover picking up on the fact that he really did inspire young voters. But as you say, it was with simple solutions to complicated problems. Often,
I think it's just kind of the simple solutions to complicated problems only really works so far because it's not a long-term solution, and I feel like the politicians who have pushed these simple solutions have royally screwed up the execution of the simple solutions, leading to more apathy within the populace.
Oh, that's really interesting.
Because you're looking at these people who have said we're going to leave Britain, I mean, I've had clips of yourself talking to Brexiters throughout the years, just recommended to me on YouTube, and you've got these people talking. You've got these like Brexiteers talking about like, oh, we can just leave and do X, and it's like, hold on, doing X requires you to go through several like government and international bodies. It's physically impossible. I think people are kind of fed up with promises
because they've won. I hadn't thought of it that way round. Because populists have succeeded, but I mean, most obviously with Brexit, and because younger people were not caught up in the populism, they didn't necessarily, but they've seen it fail completely. They now hold all politicians, especially the ones not mentioned. I don't know. I mean, I obviously like your theory because it fits with my worldview, and it's generous towards the younger generation as well, because you're describing something other than apathy. You're describing disillusion. Oh, what's the difference between disillusion and apathy, isn't it? It's engagement and then alienation as opposed to no engagement at all. Great stuff, Corey. Thank you. 10:30 is the time. So here's a question. I'm about to play you an extraordinary clip. And I know I said I was going to try to use that word less, and I am using it less, but sometimes it's the only word that fits. An extraordinary clip of the Checks Notes Conservative Party chairman being interviewed by an old mucker of mine, actually. I used to make tea for him on the Daily Express or the Sunday Express, John Craig, now, of course, plying his trade at Sky News. I genuinely couldn't quite process it last night when it popped up in front of me. I thought, how has this actually happened? I was going to do a joke about whoever is advising him having previously worked on Susan Hall's mayoral campaign in London, but I did that joke in the office, and one of my younger colleagues, which is pretty much everybody who's not on air, one of my younger colleagues said, no, it really is the same person. His advisor, because you can hear the voice of the advisor in the background, and they said, no, he really did work on Susan Hall. He was actually drafted in to rescue Susan Hall's campaign. I thought satire is dead in this country. So you have a Conservative Party chairman having an absolute nightmare in public on camera. You make a joke about the fact, well, he must have the same advisors as that woman who ran for mayor after claiming that she'd been pickpocketed when she lost her travel pass. And then the voice of the person in the background actually is talking about it is the same person. So I want you to have a listen to this, but in the context of the conversation we're having, and I don't want you to ring in and answer this. I just want you to think about, you can if you want, of course. I want you to think about whether this sort of thing actually alienates younger voters. It makes them think, what's the point? I mean, how can I get involved in politics when the, quotes, grown-ups, end quotes, behave like this? Does it? Because I would have thought that it detracted from the idea that all politicians are the same, and it actually created an idea that one lot is better or worse than another lot, and yet it may have nothing at all to do with the alienation or the dispossession, if you like, of 18 to 24-year-old voters. But is it something to do with the calibre of appointments that Rishi Sunak and Liz Truss and Boris Johnson have been compelled to make, by the shallowness of the talent pool they have? I don't know, but this, I thought by any measure, we're playing you the full 3-minute version, I thought by any measure this was an absolutely extraordinary exchange between John Craig of Sky News and Richard Holden, the chairman of the Conservative Party.
Let's start with you. How can you justify yourself, chairman of the Conservative Party, being parachuted into a safe seat 300 miles or so from your old constituency, shortlist of one, not the normal 3 or more, just a day or so before nominations close? How do you answer the charge? It just looks like an appalling stitch-up, and you're part of a self-serving elite.
This interview is about Emily Thornberry's comments today, and when she admitted that it's going to be our children across the country who pay the price for Labour's decision to try and tax private schools if they get into office. It's quite clear to me that it's not just families who are going to be paying the price with £2,000 of extra taxes under the Labour Party. It's going to be our children with larger class sizes right across the country. That, I think, is a horrendous price to pay. Children's education in order to deliver on Labour's ideological obsession.
This is a pool interview, and other broadcasters have asked me to ask about your selection, and we want to ask about it as well. I come back to the question. It looks like a stitch-up. Chairman of the party, shortlist of one, just before nominations close. How is that not an appalling stitch-up and anti-democratic?
Emily Thornberry today has completely admitted that Labour's approach to taxing schools is going to mean larger class sizes for children right across the country, particularly in the state sector. Their children are going to be paying the price for Labour's ideological obsession, with over £2,000 extra on tax for their parents and larger class sizes for children. It's children and families who are going to pay the price under a Labour government.
So you can't justify the way you have been parachuted into Basildon and Billericay. You're not denying it's a stitch-up and it's anti-democratic.
Emily Thornberry today has admitted...
I'm going to stop you now. This is ridiculous. This is ridiculous. You said in an interview earlier this year you were bloody loyal to the North East. What happened to that?
John, I've already answered these questions.
No, you haven't.
Actually, I have.
When?
When I did a Channel 4 News interview last week.
Oh, right, it's one broadcaster, isn't it? Why is the Prime Minister hiding this weekend and not answering any media questions? Is that because of the fiasco over D-Day?
The Prime Minister will be out on the road, I'm sure, over the next few days, fighting for every vote right across the country. And I think it's quite clear when you're seeing policies like Labour's VAT on schools, which are going to mean larger class sizes for children, which are going to mean taxes on working families up £2,000. I don't think British families can afford Labour's ideological obsession, and the Prime Minister will keep making that clear throughout the rest of this election campaign.
Oh no! I want the other bit as well. I want the bit on the end where you can hear the advisor interview. Is that on the shorter clip? Can we get that as well? Because that's quite important too. I'm going to read you the full list of candidates in Basildon and Billericay. Christopher David Bateman for the British Democratic Party, Stephen Conley for Reform UK, Stephen Goshawk for the Green Party, Alex Harrison for Labour, Richard John Holden, that's him, isn't it, for the Conservative and Unionist Party, Dave Murray for the Trade Union and Socialist Coalition, Edward Krishnan Sainsbury for the Liberal Democrats, and you can find that full list of candidates on the LBC website, lbc.co.uk/politics/candidates. There is a postscript to this, which is frankly extraordinary. And I don't know. I mean, does stuff like that help us understand why 18 to 24-year-olds don't think there's any point voting at all? Refusal or failure to engage even with the most basic parameters of reality and or respect, I suppose. Joseph's in Leicester to return us to the question about the younger voters. Joseph, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. I talked to you at the top of this call. How are you doing?
Very well.
I'm a politics and economics graduate, and basically none of my friends want to vote.
None of them? Even other politics and economics graduates?
Yes, even
Good
other
Lord.
graduates, yes. It's a bit of a shame. I think it's a two-pronged answer, really. First, they think Labour's actually won already. I don't know if that's down to the media or Labour themselves, but they're complacent.
Well, the polling, to be fair, it could be neither. The opinion polling is pretty unequivocal at the moment. It's so unequivocal. Nigel Farage just started complaining about the polling, which is inevitable, I suppose, if it's not gone the way that he was expecting. So it could be a combination of things. There's a feeling abroad, isn't there, that Labour are already over the line, which would explain apathy.
Yeah, exactly. The apathy comes from that, and they just don't want to vote because they think it's pointless. They think it's a waste of their time. You know, Labour already won, so what's the point? And then the second point, I suppose, is the fact that Labour aren't doing anything for young people. We're the lost generation. I'm 22. I voted in the last election, but we've had COVID disrupting our exams and our studies. You know, at university, I barely even went in because there was no, stuff going on there. And this government or even the Labour shadow government haven't really done anything for us. The big worry for me is housing and jobs and, safety for us young people, and I don't think that's being given. And to be honest,
they would argue that it is. I mean, there was stuff on for first-time buyers at the end of last week, wasn't there? There's stuff on I suppose getting nursery places for your children isn't necessarily going to be a top priority for people. Exactly where you are. Tories today talking about more community police on the streets, young people often on the receiving end of antisocial behaviour and crime. So, I mean, it's not landing. It doesn't necessarily mean it's not there.
Yeah, it's not landing, but what I would say is this election has been painted as the immigration election, but it should be painted as the next generation election.
I think it's only been painted as that by Farage. But you're right, the other two parties don't seem to be running away from it at 100 miles an hour, do they?
No, to be fair, I think Farage is controlling the narrative, though, because what I see on, TikTok and stuff like that, I mean, it's not appealing to me at all, but I do worry that this is getting through to young people that we're just not cared about. That's just my opinion on this.
Blame everything on immigrants, and young people can be probably encouraged to conclude that they are being ignored. And then, of course, you bring evidence to the table as well. What do you say? Do you try and persuade people? Do you try and tell them?
All the time. I'm on calls with them all the time. I'm talking to them all the time, and it doesn't seem like anybody's interested because they just think that nobody cares about us. I mean, I feel the same, to be honest. I just vote because I believe in it, but I don't think anybody cares about me. That's my opinion.
No, I mean, that is something that party leaders, I think, care. Well, I know that we're hearing from senior politicians throughout the election campaign on LBC, possibly not on this show. Partly through choice, partly through necessity, but they will be very, very worried to hear that. I mean, actually, Joseph, while you're here, what about the excitement of a 1997 style result? Because I was 25 in 1997. I was still selling suits on Regent Street, doing a couple of shifts on Fleet Street, so I had quite a lot to play for, as it were. And the Portillo moments, I don't know if you remember. Well, you won't remember, but you've caught up subsequently. The idea of a historic moment that involved the defenestration of household name Tories who thought that they were in Parliament for life, that wouldn't engage your mates. That's not something they'd get excited about.
I mean, for me personally, it'd definitely get me excited. I don't know if it would get them excited. I think the fact that we might get a fresh new government and potential change is somewhat exciting to me, but I don't believe it.
No, and all of you young people. I sound like a university lecturer trying to get down with the kids. All of you fellow youths, all of you young people talking along similar themes. I don't know what the magic formula would be to get that connection. I do know what the end of that remarkable interview with Richard Holden, the chairman of the Conservative Party, sounded like, and in a few seconds' time, so will you.
This is ridiculous. You said in an interview earlier this year you were bloody loyal to the North East. What happened to that?
John, I've already answered these questions.
No, you haven't.
Actually, I have.
When?
When I did a Channel 4 News interview last week.
Oh, right, it's one broadcaster, isn't it? This is a pool interview for all the other broadcasters.
I think
these broadcasters agreed that the questions have been...
No, nobody agreed that at all. Well, I've got a list here of questions from other broadcasters.
All three broadcasters agreed. Everyone on this...
Nobody's agreed. No, absolutely not. No, absolutely not.
The proof. They all agreed this. Well, if that's where it's going to go, then we'll just leave, because that's not what we agreed to come here today to discuss.
So if you only ask us the questions that we're prepared to answer, we will leave. And remember, the chairman of a party is supposed to be the second most important campaigner, really, because he goes super constituency, as in above constituency, a national level campaign. There's a case for arguing they're the second most important. I don't know whether that adds to the sense of disillusionment, shall we say. I prefer disillusionment to apathy that we're reporting on this morning, but it can hardly help. It's 10:45. 10:48 is the time, and I suppose, adding to Tory travails, the leader of the Scottish Tories, as you've heard in the bulletins this morning, Douglas Ross, has announced that he's going to resign. And if he wins a seat at the general election, he will then stand down immediately as a member of the Scottish Parliament. Well, crikey, it's all going on, isn't it? No wonder Rishi Sunak's high. Has anyone seen him yet today? Have we seen? And I think is he going to a neighbourhood watch meeting? I heard. You think I'm joking, don't you? It's like Howard out of ever-decreasing circles. What was his wife called? Can never remember. They used to wear the same anoraks. Showing my age a bit. In fact, alienating precisely the people I'm encouraging to ring in today by making references to a sitcom that was over long before they were born. But it is an interesting question. Why? And speaking of resignations, we'll also be looking at the decision of Benny Gantz to resign from the Israeli war cabinet. That is, of course, significant as well. Grim scenes once again coming in from Gaza, leavened in small part, but leavened nonetheless by the joyful scenes greeting the rescue of 4 hostages. But Benny Gantz's decision to finally resign from the Israeli war cabinet might get filed under better late than never. and yet remains significant. But why will 18 to 24-year-olds be less inclined to vote than us old gits would perhaps expect? Afzal is in Camden. Afzal, what can you tell us?
Hi, James.
Hello.
I'm 20. I'm a law student in, UCL.
Yeah.
And it's, to be honest, young people know we've grown up in an era where, you neither had a good Conservative Party, you've neither had a good Labour Party. I mean, when I became, politically aware, it was David Cameron.
Right.
And the way I became aware was the fact that I had the same primary school teacher for 4 years. And then later I looked at, the numbers for the cost per head for student. Yeah, right. And it reduced ridiculously under, that first Tory term.
So you're counting the personal cost of austerity from your primary school classroom. You're a little bit more engaged than most at that age, then we could say.
Yeah, I mean, I wasn't looking at it when I was in primary school, but afterwards, because I am from a working class family, I went to a state grammar school. I was introduced to people who, came from private primary school and so on. And I met them, and to me, it was wondering, why did I have the same teacher for 4 years? And she used to, buy things for us out of pocket, out of her own wage.
And things are I think, considerably worse now than they were then. So talk me about how you moved from that to thinking that there's no point getting involved this time round.
Well, I do think people should get involved. I mean, I've been politically aware, but It's more understanding that people don't want to be involved, because to them it's what's really the point. No one offers something that is offering some real change here.
What would that look like? What would that look like? If like an offer that would be both, remember, feasible and costed and all of that malarkey, but also irresistible. So like a game-changing offer for a 20-year-old like you. I
mean, obviously the 24-hour news cycle, what we see from the media is these guys who, they send politicians up there and they read a script and then it's cool. And there's no backbone there. There's no honesty. There's no.
So they all seem to be the same territory, which surprises me. But that's what you're saying. What you see.
I mean, is when we see someone who goes up there and he's not reading off the script and they are giving an honest answer. I think recently it was on BBC's, not Question Time, I think it was Newsnight, where a Labour MP went up and someone asked him, do you support getting rid of, I think it was voter ID? And he just said, I don't know. Okay. And then he's like, let me find out for you. And people respect that honesty, because it's like, you can't know everything, and we're not stupid. We don't expect you to know everything. Thank you for being honest.
Yeah. I like that. So the fear of I mean, Nick's very good at this, asking people if they know how much a tin of Coke is and stuff like that. It creates, and I'm not criticising him. I mean, you should know, if you're coming on here to talk about children's issues, you should know how much child benefit is, or you should know how much a loaf of bread costs, or how many people have got dementia. All of these things, you can deal with those. You can have the statistics that you need before you go into an interview. But you're describing a fear almost of answering a question with a substantive response. It's as if they're frightened of saying anything that could lead to a gotcha moment.
Exactly. And how can we trust these guys if they can't give an honest, substantive answer? How can we trust them to tackle issues like housing, issues like student loans, issues like graduate jobs for, young professionals, issues like the massive wealth inequality? Right.
And you're not hearing any of this at all. And you're not hearing anything big enough or sexy enough, if you like, to actually nudge your needle. I sense you will vote.
I will vote, yeah, but I
not with any particular, not with a spring in your step, Afzal. Not with a spring in your step.
No, not this time. I mean,
you won't be pirouetting into the polling booth
not this year, no.
Not this year. Well, maybe next time. We'll have to see. Darren Jones, a lot of people are suggesting, would be the person you're talking about. I'm very lucky to be able to read that reference, because my inbox is currently full of people shouting Hilda. Do you know why my inbox is full of people shouting Hilda? Because it was Howard and Hilda, of course, in ever-decreasing circles, who were sort of stalwarts of the Neighbourhood Watch. scheme and wore the same anoraks. At least that's how my memory works. Brian Taylor is a political commentator and columnist at the Herald in Scotland. He joins me now. I can't conduct every interview during this election campaign by opening with the line, "Nobody saw this coming, did they, Brian?" But nobody saw this coming, did they, Brian?
Not entirely, no. Although I wrote in a column at the weekend saying perhaps it would be time for him to pick a parliament. This is Douglas Ross, of course, we're talking of. I mean, for goodness sake, I think it was Churchill who said anybody can rat on a party. It takes a certain amount of ingenuity to re-rat. Well, Douglas Ross has done it in a way. You know, he was in Westminster, and then he said, "No, I'm coming back to Holyrood." So he became a list MSP in the Scottish Parliament in order to become the leader. And then he thinks, well, maybe not. Maybe I'll head back to Westminster. So he ended up suggesting he would contest a Westminster seat of Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, but at the same time he would remain as a list member of the Scottish Parliament and remain as leader. Many of his colleagues in the Scottish Parliament, up with this, they would not put. Basically, they thought it was splitting his, and it was the exact opposite of what he said he would do. He said he would focus upon Holyrood, focus upon leading the party, and would give up Westminster. It was a fairly, I think you'd call it a courageous decision. That's you were talking about
bold, Brian, very bold.
You were talking about comedy series in Yes Minister. Yes Minister Sir Humphrey said courageous decision.
Yes,
Minister.
he did.
Does that mean it's good? No, Minister. So I think this goes into the category of courageous. Now, look, basically, the previous MSP from the old seats, been boundary changes, was a guy called David Ducat. He was a minister in the Scotland office, very well respected, rooted in the northeast of Scotland, but he became very seriously ill, and despite him insisting that he was adamant that he was okay to carry on, the party said, no, sorry, you're going to have to stand down, step aside. And then the following day, this was last Wednesday, and the following day, Douglas Ross said, I've looked exhaustively at the list of potential candidates, and I'm the boy, and said that he would stand for the seat himself. It caused a real ruckus in the party. They said, but you said you were focusing upon the Scottish Parliament. You said you were focusing upon the leader, and now you say you're going to carry on doing both jobs, and he's also a football linesman.
Which he's got into a little bit of bother for lately. That's got nothing to do with this decision, or
it probably adds to the joy because he's gone into a little bit of.
So just to clarify, Brian,
it's bad enough being a conservative at the present moment. He has to just really win public hearts and minds by being a linesman.
These are tried and tested lines from a consummate columnist. What Just to completely clarify, then, he won't be Scottish leader anymore.
He will stand down definitely as Scottish leader following the election on July the 4th.
If he wins the Aberdeenshire North and Moray East seat in Westminster, then he will leave Holyrood, but he'll remain as a Conservative MP in Westminster.
Correct. He would go back to what some more cynical commentators, i.e. me, might say that the Conservatives would see as the Imperial Parliament. He'd return to Westminster. Look, to be serious for a moment, he is. There have been question marks about his leadership anyway. There've been mutterings and grumbles as to whether he was really driving the party forward. They're not doing well, as Rishi Sunak would attest across the UK. They're not doing well in Scotland. They're defending 6 Scottish constituencies they won last time out. They took a by-election one as well, but 6 seats that they won in their own title the last time out. The SNP are second in every single one. Now, the SNP are already worried that Labour are going to cut into their seats, so they are desperate to take these seats to kind of keep their numbers up in a way of balance. And so what Douglas Ross was trying to do was to say, this is it's a battle between us and the SNP. Forget about the Labour Party. It's a battle for the Union. It's a battle to defend the United Kingdom. And he tried to polarise the debate in that way with a certain degree. There's been a certain degree of success in the past. It wasn't quite working this time because of the focus upon Labour replacing the UK government. It wasn't quite working generally because the SNP are fighting pretty hard in these seats. But he then decided to instead of leading the party from Holyrood, he said he was going to lead from the front by standing himself in a constituency, a redrawn constituency that includes a fair chunk of his old Moray seat, which was broken up at the time of the dissolution of Parliament. And so he saw it as being, the party said, we had to protect David Ducat. He wasn't well enough to stand. I know he doesn't see it that way, but we had to protect him, duty of care, all that sort of thing. And Douglas Ross concluded, he thought, right, I'm the boy to stand. Emergency, we've only got a day to choose a candidate. I'm the one. I'm going to lead.
That's very selfless of him. And does that mean then that there will be a by-election in
he's a list.
He's a list. So just someone else will move up the list and pick up, of course. So that's the
lucky individual just steps into the breach. Yeah. If he stands down, if he wins the seat, and
if he doesn't win the seat, he'll stay in Holyrood.
He carries on as a list MP.
It's an extraordinary state of affairs, which you have crystallised quite perfectly for us. Thank you very much indeed, Brian Taylor, the columnist at the Herald and a veteran chronicler of Scottish politics. It's coming up to 11 o'clock, a full list of candidates. It's political paranoia time. A full list of candidates standing in Aberdeenshire North and Moray East, not Moray, as some stupid Sassenach sometimes pronounce it. Ian Bailey for the Liberal Democrats, Andy Brown for the Labour Party, Joe Hart for Reform UK, Seamus Logan for the SNP, and Douglas Ross currently for the Conservatives. It's just gone 11 o'clock. 3 minutes after 11, I wondered how long it would take for somebody to... I mean, we filled our boots with Rishi Sunak's absolutely dismal decision to come back early from Normandy. And do you know what happened? Something quite amazing happened. You think sometimes I exaggerate when I tell you how good the callers to this programme are. Much better than the presenter. And on Friday, I think it was Alex in Tooting, wasn't it, who offered up a theory on what had actually happened. We got the question bang on Friday. Just allow me a small pat upon my own head, if you don't mind, which is, of course, famously what happens whenever you happen to walk under a cow. I didn't just say, how angry are you on a scale of 1 to 10? Or how? The question was perfect on Friday because we were speculating about what had happened in the room where it happens. Oh, speaking of which, for really old school LBC fans, long before my time, I had dinner with some lovely Australian friends on Saturday night, and we were talking about Hamilton. That's why it's just jogged my memory, because that song, In the Room Where It Happens, comes from Hamilton. And they're very good mates with a presenter called Mike Carlton, who many of you will remember from presenting The Breakfast Show on LBC in a previous incarnation. In fact, I suspect Clive Bull was probably around at the time. But and I've now made contact with Mike, who's back in Australia, but who remembers his time at LBC incredibly fondly. So therefore, for a presumably relatively small cohort of my audience, there's a little blast from the past for you. But we asked, what conversations do you think had happened in the room where it happens? In other words, how could the Prime Minister have stumbled into such an obviously crass and potentially catastrophic error? And Alex in Tooting suggested that he didn't want to be seen with foreign leaders, or he didn't prioritise the event that involved foreign leaders. Now, the inimitable Tim Shipman did one of his trademark deep dives in the Sunday Times yesterday. And it turned out Alex was pretty much right. The calculation was that we'd attended the British event, so the international one would not really be that important. And to be honest with you, it's a bit like the closing of an episode of Scooby-Doo now, this conversation. But I think they would have got away with it if it wasn't for that photograph in which David Cameron appeared. I really do. Henry said to us, Henry Riley, who did such extraordinary work last week from Normandy, I know an awful lot of you were both impressed and profoundly moved by it. It's a deep compliments to him for that work. But he pointed out that no one had really clocked Sunak's absence from the ceremony because the British press pack were not covering it with the assiduousness that they had covered the British commemoration, the British ceremony. But then the photograph appeared in which Olaf Scholz, the German Chancellor, Emmanuel Macron, the French President, and indeed Joe Biden, the President of the United States of America, were all chummily congregated with David Cameron on the edge of the grouping, not Rishi Sunak. And then I'm afraid the alarms went off. Even Cameron, because the other thing we talked about on Friday, and I suspect that some people involved in this story were listening quite closely, because Cameron's people moved incredibly strongly this weekend to stress that he had told Sunak this was a bad idea, and asked why he didn't sort of grab him by the shirt collars and tell him he has to be there. He goes, well, there's only so much I can do, which in David Cameron's case is quite a lot when you consider the state of the country that he has left us with. But there it is. So Alex in Tooting gets caller of the week for last week because he absolutely nailed it. And do you know what? Even with my anti-Brexit credentials, we shouldn't really call them that anymore, should we? Even with my pro-reality credentials, the paranoia involved in that kind of decision making, or the petty, lazy jingoism involved in that kind of decision making, I thought was possibly a step too far. I really did. No, don't be silly. They're not actually going to. We haven't become such a desiccated, inward-looking, insular administration that we're actually going to just duck out of something because it's a little bit foreign. And then I remembered the retained EU Law Act, which, of course, was dedicated to removing from our statute books any legislation at all that had origins during our membership of the European Union because it was a little bit foreign. It doesn't matter how good the law was. This was Rees-Mogg's pet project, remember? It doesn't matter how good the law. It could be the best law in the world. It could be your favourite law. It could be the king of the laws. It could be the best law. But if it smelt a bit French, or it kind of looked a bit Polish, or a bit German, then they were going to sling it out there. That's literally what that entire political project was dedicated to. So if we'd stopped to think about it a little bit more, we may have concluded that Alex in Tooting was absolutely right. I'm not going to put you in Idiot's Corner, Bernard, because I can't tell whether or not you are being serious. But Bernard has WhatsApp to say, James, you are plagiarising my theory. Look at my WhatsApp message to LBC at 11:59 on Friday. It was deliberate. Two thoughts, Bernard. I think that Alex in Tooting had made that point before 11:59 on Friday, and there's no earthly way that I can see everyone. In fact, we even did a thing on Friday. We posted the graph of the number of people that started WhatsApping the programme when Rishi Sunak started his apology for not going to the D-Day, International D-Day commemoration, the International D-Day ceremony. And our graph went ballistic. It went absolutely, it went up faster than Liz Truss's graph went down after she announced her budget. So the idea that I would, A, notice your WhatsApp, B, pass it off as my own, and then C, pretend otherwise on the Monday, Bernard, is close to an Idiot's Corner entry. But on this occasion, I will give you the benefit of the doubt. Because I genuinely wondered how long it would take for Nigel Farage to bring Rishi Sunak's ethnicity into it. And I wondered how he would do it. I didn't wonder whether he would do it. I wondered how he would do it. And then I wondered, having been something of a student of Farage's tactics for the last 10 years or so, and then I wondered what backpedal he'd deploy, what obviously and transparently dishonest tactic he would use to pretend that he wasn't bringing Rishi Sunak's ethnicity into it. And then, lo and behold, up he popped, claiming that Rishi Sunak doesn't really care about our culture. He doesn't care about our history. Why not? Well, the bit that's never said out loud, which is why people talk about dog whistles, it's because he's brown. It's because he's of Asian heritage. He's the son of first-generation immigrants. Not even worth a debate on what Nigel Farage meant. But Nigel Farage being Nigel Farage, you then go back to the well to find out what pathetic attempt he'll make to pretend that he wasn't being racist. And the answer is that he was talking about Rishi Sunak's class, you see. He's too rich, apparently, too isolated, if you like, from the experiences of poorer people to fully understand what it is to care about our veterans, which is bad news for King Charles, isn't it? Under Nigel Farage's reading of what qualifies you as someone who cares about our culture, apparently it's the contents of your bank balance. And the richer you are, the less likely you are to care about our culture. So, as I say, as a somewhat, I don't want to say reluctant student, because he's obviously always very good for business, but as a somewhat tired student of Nigel Farage's tactics, you could predict that the racist dog whistle would be deployed, and you could predict without a shadow of a doubt that there would be a subsequent backpedal involving something obviously untrue, which people either mildly or broadly sympathetic to his prejudices and bigotries would pretend was a valid contribution to the debate. Oh, no, I didn't mean his brown skin. Oh, no. I meant he's too rich to care about D-Day veterans, or his class is the problem. And it struck me that I quite like the phrase white privilege, because thanks to David Olusogo and others, A few of you pointing out that Farage had a hissy fit when they tried to close his Coots bank account. So I don't know whether that would somehow exclude him or disqualify him from caring about our culture. Can you really care about our culture if you've got a Coots bank account? I don't know. But a form of cultural racism is probably the best way of describing it. But the inevitability of it happening reminded me of what I have learnt from people like John Amici and David Olusoga, the superb historian. White privilege is an unhelpful phrase because dishonest people can use it to pretend that it means all white people are hugely advantaged, when of course it doesn't. What would you rather be? The son of first-generation Indian immigrants with 700 million quid in a bank, or a white bloke sleeping under Charing Cross Bridge? So, you know, that idea of it being a catch-all term or a blanket is palpably ridiculous, but it's still a helpful term for me, because here's an example of it. I do not know what that feels like. I think sometimes the richer you are, the less exposed to it you are. So I don't know that Rishi Sunak would have been putting up with it all of his life. But this intimation, this sly implication that you're not really British or that you're not really English. We heard it last week. We had a caller almost like from the old days up in Durham telling us that people in Oldham are all foreigners. Regardless of where they were born, they're foreigners. Farage has done it historically with regard to people speaking foreign on trains. And of course, any decent interviewer at that point, as Michelle Hussain did on Radio 4 last week, would point out that his own children speak foreign to their mother. Their language, their mother tongue, their first language is not English. But he knows exactly what he's doing. He knows exactly what he's tooting on the dog whistle. But it struck me that I don't know what that's like. I was reminded of the occasion in the Buckingham Palace garden where the lady in waiting asked too many times a black guest where she was really from. And we talked about that a lot at the time because it was a real clash of generation, that in that the lady in waiting concerned would have had absolutely no idea of the potential offence that she would cause. That's not a defence, that's not an excuse, it's an explanation, and it's one that in a million billion years would never apply to Nigel Farage, who of course was a great fan of Donald Trump, who of course wanted to introduce a Muslim ban to the whole of America. And that's why I thought we'd talk now about what it's like. Just other examples. So we'll park Nigel Farage personally and focus instead upon this, if you like, this middle-class racist trope, this racist dog whistle that is deployed to make you, as someone of colour, feel, well, when you, as someone of colour, know that this person is implying that you're not really British. I want you to tell me how it works. I want you to tell me what the most common depictions are. Oh, you don't really understand our culture. Where are you really from? Those sorts of things I thought might be helpful, just to, lest anyone is sincerely or genuinely confused about what Farage was playing at, as opposed to just pretending because of some mild concurrence with his thoughts. So I want to know what that's like. Hit the numbers now and you will get through. 0345 6060 973. It's like integration, isn't it? I don't mind as long as they integrate. And you think, well, here's a bloke who's just been elected Mayor of London for the third time. Oh, yeah, I hate him. But back to that call we took from Durham last week. Do you see what I mean? You can't, for some people, you can't integrate enough, can you? You can't. You could be Home Secretary and still be on the receiving end of racist abuse from your own colleagues. I just want to know what examples you would point to first as the proof, if you like, of this quiet dog whistling racism. And if you hit the numbers now, you will get through. 0345 6060 973. Farage has deployed one of the classics. If you're brown, you can't really understand our culture. God knows what descendant of Huguenot refugees means by that, but, well, actually, we all know. What are the other things that you've encountered or that you've experienced in your life that speak to the idea that if you're not white, you're not British? Because that is very much part of the electoral appeal of politicians who've done rather well in the European Union elections over the course of this weekend and in other national European elections. It's like a hierarchy of Britishness, if you like, and there's nothing you can do to change where you are on it. 0345 6060 973 is the number, 11:17 is the time. 20 minutes after 11, one of my favourite correspondents who I often mention to you, who tweets as no hostages, has actually put together previously, there's no earthly way he's done it in the last 10 minutes, an extraordinary A to Z of some of the stuff that we're talking about this hour. Know your dog whistles, watching out for far-right tropes during the 2024 British general election. I shall retweet it shortly, but I'm going to read it in full first because I will no doubt be passing off some of the wisdom contained therein as my own work between now and 11 o'clock. But you know some of these phrases like multiculturalism or cultural Marxism, or get our country back. What we should say, well, who's got it at the moment? It's a phrase I hear a lot. We want our country back. And you say, well, what do you mean? You want your country back? From whom? Unless you've got a problem with brown-skinned politicians having positions of power, in which case you should just come out and say so, instead of being too cowardly, if that's the right word, or too conscious of the parameters of common decency. So instead you just claim that they don't understand our culture. 21 minutes after 11 is the time. What am I talking about? You tell me. Farouk is in Maidstone. Farouk, what would you like to say?
Morning. Yeah, okay. So I think, James, it's more than a dog whistle, to be honest. It's pretty obvious what you're saying. And I think
well, no, it's not. Listen, I'm only splitting hairs with you, all right? But if he'd said he doesn't understand our culture because he's brown or because he's Asian or because he's the son of immigrants, then it is explicit. The bit that's left unsaid is what makes it technically dog whistle. And that's just me being semantic and pedantic, but also accurate.
Now my turn to respond. Okay. Look, I understand that, but at the same time, we are mature enough now in the 21st century, third decade,
yes,
as to what tropes really are. Okay.
Yes.
You don't have to say. I mean, I fully understand if somebody says that to me on my face. A culture. The word culture means a lot more than just.
You don't understand. You don't understand our culture.
Yeah. I mean, even the word culture. Oh, in this culture.
Yeah.
In this country, we do that. So all these things are pretty obvious what they mean. Okay. So first of all, I am never in any doubt whatsoever. So it's not even dog whistle. It's more than that now.
No, fair enough.
Coming from, and also the context is important, right? The person who's saying it has been very openly anti-Muslim anyway.
Yes.
Right? And a person like him, when he says context always matters, who's saying it. Okay?
Yes.
So you simply can't just say, I understand the intent might be very good to call it dog whistle because people are well-intended when they say that, but I think it's more than that. And we are in a territory in this country or elsewhere in the West in general and America in particular, is where being anti-Muslim, I'm going to come to Rishi Sunak in a second, but let me first of all talk about, because it's not as simple as a brown skin or a non-white skin. It really is basically more shades there than just the black. Well, not shades, and no pun intended.
No, I understand.
Right. So what I mean to say is, look, it's very straightforward. That being a Muslim myself and a professional myself, and I've noticed a huge acceptance of some rhetoric which really would not have been acceptable 4, 5, 6 years ago, right? And the things have moved on so quickly that being a Muslim in this country is sometimes difficult.
Has it moved on more in the last 5 or 6 years? Because I know that everything changed after the September the 11th attacks, and yet you're talking about gears moving through the rhetoric has moved through gears.
But that's going too far back. No, September 11th was too far back.
Yeah, fair enough.
I'm talking much recent past.
No, I know you are. James. I know you are. But you're talking about an escalation that is more recent, not
escalation, which seems to be a designed thing. It's not just out of nowhere. It seems to be a concerted effort. And sometimes they're parachuting people into different parties in positions of power and to be MPs, for example. It is not just a different situation. I think it's all part of the same game.
Can you give me some examples? Can you point to things that evidence what you're describing?
It'd be very easy if people start calling me somebody who's controversial, but I've got to be perfectly honest, right? I do believe that even the makeup of MPs and what they can say when they can't say in the Parliament itself speaks volumes.
With regard to Gaza or with regard to...
Yeah, Gaza is one of those in the story, okay? Gaza is a very obvious, blatant truth we can't deny, right?
Yes.
When people are dying in their multiple thousands and hundreds on a daily basis, and you simply are not going to say a word about stop, enough is enough, you can't say that, clearly means there's a problem. Okay, so that simply is a symptom of a deeper problem, and deeper problem.
It is, but I don't want you to feel that I'm corralling you. But I don't disagree with what you've just said. I don't know that it's necessarily a Muslim thing. I think it's probably a brown skin thing as much as anything else. If it was white people dying in Gaza, then there'd be a very different conversation unfolding. I agree. But hang on, but I do want to nudge. I just want to remind you what this hour is about. This hour is about. I've got 30 other people waiting to talk to me, Farooq, and it's 25 past 11.
I'll finish.
Yeah,
okay,
go on.
So I think what goes on comes around.
Yes.
Rishi Sunak has been very quiet.
Yeah.
Has been very much part of the whole story to win his acceptance amongst the white people, unfortunately, rather than being genuine, but being a genuine person. So now it's a time. It's basically in the end he should pay the price of what he's been doing himself. He's been a bit too sly. He's not being honest about what he actually is. I mean, if he's a man of colour, he should have been honest. At least what people of colour, or people who are non-white, or people.
He's been pretty clear about Farage not being welcome in his party. Suella Braverman this morning is on the front page of one newspaper, rolling out the red carpet. So he deserves a more generous hearing, perhaps, than she does.
Yeah, but I think also, I don't know if I heard it right. You're saying, or somebody else said it this morning, that Shabana Mahmood said about the dog whistle term, and I said Shabana Mahmood being a very nice person because she's a Muslim herself. Right. But she would have felt, if I was in her shoes, I would have said, hang on a second, this very man, Rishi Sunak, was himself being an anti-Muslim, right? And now you are defending him because
when was
you
that?
Really care. I think him allowing everything that's happening in the Conservative Party.
Okay, So silence being violence or complicity being culpability. Thank you. I'm cracking on. I just felt I needed to zone you in, focus you in a little bit on some of the specifics of the question that I'm asking, but I wasn't in any way disagreeing with most of what you said. I just, as a white bloke, I want lessons in what it's like to know that something I may not even notice is loaded. A genuine dog whistle, as opposed to what Farage did this weekend, which was to blow a whistle and then pretend it was a dog whistle later by talking about culture and class. Vanessa is in Woking. And Vanessa, what would you like to say?
Hi, yes. Good morning, James. Big fan.
Thank you.
I am a classic example of this. I came over, I'm Anglo-Indian.
Right.
And Anglo-Indians are very much British, brought up in the British culture. English is our first language.
Yes.
We have a slightly odd mixture of Indian image, but we were basically created by the Brits in the 16th century, during the sort of East India time and the army, etc., and colonialisation. But after independence, my parents decided, we were marginalised as well because we never accepted being Indian. There was three hierarchies, right?
Yes.
The Brits, us, and the Indians. So we kind of ran India for them. So we sort of ran the railways, blah, blah, blah. Anyway, so came over to the UK. At that time, had a lot of prejudice because although my parents were pretty fair, me and my brothers were very dark. But I've since lost that. But we started school, lived in Harrow, anyway, the story ends as when during the Brexit campaign, went to see a very old friend who I was in my class at primary school, whom I loved dearly, and he had become very right-wing, very pro-Brexit, and I was completely the opposite.
Yes.
We got into a passionate discussion after a few drinks, and he became very passive-aggressive, which I'd never seen in him before, and it was very sad. And then he said to me, Van, you're not English. You'll just never understand.
Wow.
And I mean, I don't think anybody can realise the impact that had on me.
Well,
I have not seen.
Take your time. Take your time. Tell us what that's like.
Well, it broke my heart because I loved this guy. He was one of my best friends, and the fact that he didn't realise that I'm as English as he is in the way I think. I might have been born somewhere else, but it was such a shock. And Di, his wife, who was very sweet, but she said, yes, man, you're not British, you're not English, you'll never understand. You just don't get it.
What was it that they felt you could never understand? Was it the nativist desire to chuck foreigners out?
Not
or
that.
What
it
then?
was the fact that we were going to be, the big England again, the empire, all those important things that they'd been brought up with,
right.
The fact that they had colonised, and I was just like obviously, I hadn't been brought up in that king and culture.
Well, except that you had,
Yeah.
of course, just on the other side of the world.
Exactly, and they hadn't got that even in all those years that, my father did very well. We all went to
What did he
uni,
think you were? If you said, "What am I then?" what would he have said?
Well, I was so shocked. I don't know. He would have said, I don't know,
Indian.
you're half Indian. Yeah, or you're Indian. Which even though I'm 50% genetically Indian, that means, I hate to say it, but it means nothing to me.
No,
I mean, I don't feel racist or anything.
We are who we want to be.
Well, no, you have to understand, because the Anglo-Indians were so wanting to be British, but we were always subjugated. My father was a colonel, but he had to salute to a colonel in the English army.
Oh,
that was the hierarchy.
So
it was really...
They weren't equal.
No way.
Did that friendship end that day?
Yeah, as far as I'm concerned. I mean, we've never met each other, and that was since that time.
And you'd been friends for years and years?
Since I was 7.
Since you were 7, and then you carry... Yeah. And if it wasn't for Brexit, that never would actually have come to the surface.
No, I never realised. But
and he liked you. He considered you a good friend as well, but his concept of Englishness was Farrageist, I suppose.
Oh, absolutely, and I'm sure he's still very right-wing. We haven't gone there. We haven't discussed... Well, because I haven't seen them. I mean, I've struck up friendship with Di again because she's been very sweet and trying to sort of... but not... Wes hasn't made any inroads or any overtures to try and mend the...
Do you think he knows how hurt you are?
No, I don't think he does, and
because he wouldn't have said it if he knew. He wouldn't have wanted to hurt you. He just thought this was an observation.
I don't know, James. I think at that time people were so dogmaed that they could not see beyond.
Great word. I don't know if it's a verb, but it is now, Vanessa. Dogmaed up to the eyeballs.
Yeah.
Well, I'm so sorry for that. That's such a powerful example of what we're trying to talk about this hour. But I'm obviously sorry that you're in such a powerful position to make that contribution, because it's awful what you describe, and it is, and it's helpful as well that you speak from. You mentioned, the sort of middle class or relatively privileged background, because one of the worst things these people do is pretend that they somehow represent what they call working class values. That lazy, he's not really, or she's not really English, or Sunak doesn't really understand our culture. I encounter it, partly because of my milieu. I encounter it a lot more from sort of public school boys like Nigel Farage than I do from people who are likely to be working in a workforce that is both multicultural and diverse. Vanessa, thank you. 11:32 is the time. Phone lines are open. 0345 6060 973 is the number. 25 minutes to 12. Ed Davey, leader of the Liberal Democrats, who I think it's fair to say is living his best life at the moment. I hope this is the right word to use. If it isn't the right word to use, then I apologise in advance. He's a very guileless man. Talking earlier to some of the younger people minded not to vote, or explaining to me why their contemporaries are minded not to vote. I should have thought of Ed Davey more, actually, because he is a guileless man. He does answer questions from the heart and sometimes from the hip. And I think during this campaign, against the odds, actually, because the media insists on giving so much more attention to outfits that are unlikely to win to win any seats, or certainly more than 1 or 2 seats, and yet the Liberal Democrats sometimes seems to be squeezed out of that conversation. Ed Davey has managed to attract levels of attention by just sort of being almost when I say superhuman, I don't mean superhuman. I mean like excessively human. Like playing the drums in the old people's home, and being photographed in all sorts of, not quite bungee jumping, but also not doing it like Johnson used to do it, where Johnson would be absolutely 100% aware of exactly where the cameras were and how it would play out. But it's as if his advisors have said to him, look, we know what you're like. We know that you're a bit daft and very lovely. So just go out there and be yourself. And then when we get the cameras and the spotlights on us because you're being a bit daft and very lovely, then we can get the policies out there. And he's putting the policies out there today, announcing the manifesto with pledges, particularly on NHS and social care, and also reiterating that line, which I'm afraid I often forget to remind you, that they have also pledged, the Liberal Democrats, to rebuild the United Kingdom's relationship with Europe, a conversation that neither main party is prepared to have at the moment. Nesrine Malik in The Guardian today has written a superb article about this, which, if you get a literary reference right, then you will be in my good books for a very, very long time. If you nod towards a literary reference, especially if it's from a book I've actually read, but you use it in a way that actually conveys a feeling that 1,000 words or 1,000 pages of exposition couldn't convey, then you're my favourite. And Nesrine does it quite beautifully with a reference to Passage to India in Ian Forster's novel, when talking about the shameful absence of Brexit, really, from electoral conversations and the ramifications of that absence for the foreseeable future. 11:37 is the time. Back to that election and back to the examples of exactly what Nigel Farage was playing at. I'm getting picked up now for having changed my pronunciation of his name. It always oscillates. He said himself many years ago, he doesn't care how you pronounce his name. It's like garage or garage. But he actually bridles when you say Farage. So another example of his relationship with the truth, just as his promise that he wasn't going to stand at all, which lasted for what, about 72 hours, I think. But anyway, Farage's nudge, nudge, wink, wink comments about Rishi Sunak coming back from D-Day early because he's brown. Except he didn't say that. He said because he doesn't understand our culture. And then when it's pointed out to him that could be construed as being profoundly racist, he pretended that he actually meant class. Oh, yes, because obviously if you're posh and rich, you can't appreciate the importance of D-Day. Which kind of makes you wonder what King Charles was doing there, doesn't it, in the first place? 11:38 is the time. Back to that kind of... you know, as someone of colour, something that I don't know, and you know what it's like when somebody is, I was going to say, intimating that you're not really British, but Vanessa's story, which was the one we heard before the news, was not implicit at all. Vanessa's childhood friend in the aftermath of Brexit was adamant that she wasn't English, and therefore she would never understand the beauty of Brexit. Mo's in Brighton. Mo, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
First-time caller.
Welcome.
Yeah, so, really interesting what's happening in the UK at the moment. So, give you a little bit of story. So, when I came here as a refugee, and one thing that I wanted to do was really join the British Army.
Okay.
So, I was naturalised. I became a British citizen. I was in the Army Cadets. I came to join the Army. Somebody made a comment, and I said something, I'm not going to say on the radio, as to sort of my ethnicity. And as to why I should not join the army. And that was somebody in the recruitment office.
Really?
Absolutely. And you know what? I walked out of that place and I thought, if these are the guys that I'm going to be sort of, potentially going to war with, think that of me. Why on earth would I put myself in this place? And then, as I sort of got older in the UK and so on and so forth, I used to get a lot of, it's them, not you, but you're different. I don't like so-and-so type of people. But
So
you're different.
I don't mean you.
Yeah, basically, and I used to get that a lot. And
what was it? What was it? What do you think they meant, Mo? I presume you've given it some thought. Did they just know you, and therefore they didn't mean you? And if they didn't know you, they would mean you?
Well, I think it's like kind of like, as what this Nigel Farage guy is doing and saying, oh, it's not you, it's the others, it's them, they're not like us, they're not the same as us. And the way that he sort of tried to say that Rishi Sunak doesn't understand our culture because he's rich and he's privileged. Well, so are most right-wing politicians in this country, or anywhere for that matter, or the Conservatives. Most of them are out of touch. But he wouldn't necessarily say that. And I think really it's now, as you see in the rest of Europe, the politics is becoming very sort of us and them, and everybody's becoming very nationalist in their view. And I just think that's and goes back to the point about voting, young people voting. Now, imagine if you're like Brown and you're young, and you hear this kind of talk on the radio and on the media, and us, them, swarms of people invading us. Why on earth would you want to participate in a country?
Well, what about when they start falling for it, though? Which is across Europe, that's what's happened. Younger people are a lot warmer towards these far right organisations who've done well in Austria from countries like Austria and Belgium and. I think Denmark may have gone in the opposite direction, actually. Sweden went in the opposite direction. Germany's got a big problem with the far right. Farage, of course.
Spain nearly went into the, with the Vox party.
But young people in those countries are more susceptible to these blame it all on
is
immigrant
that a question
invitations.
Is that a problem of the state of the nations and the right-wing media sort of picking up on that and playing on it, on people's fears? Or have people always been right-wing and maybe some of these people have given them a
you have
voice,
fascist
so to
histories,
speak?
don't you, in Italy, in Spain, in Germany? Of course you do. And I suppose you've got the Vichy regime in France. We never actually went down that road in this country, which may have some sort of historic sense memory. The Netherlands as well, Nazi occupied. The Netherlands has gone very far right.
Yeah.
I hope you're wrong about that, but it is.
So do I. Well, on a good note, though, most of my friends that have sort of right of a centre sort of views on politics see Nigel Farage as a bit of a joke, really, and don't take what he says seriously. Now, I know some people do, but the worrying thing is really for my kids growing up in this country and sort of how they see themselves. That's what's sad about it.
Yes, that would be a concern about that. Where it's tides. Tony Benn got this right. I didn't really understand what he meant when I first came across this. I think it was in his diaries. He wrote about you never win anything. Or all you ever do is push back a bit against these forces that will then push back at you. And I think blaming everything on foreigners or telling Vanessa that she's not really English or claiming that Rishi Sunak can't really understand the importance of D-Day because of his culture or because he doesn't understand our culture. I mean, what's the name of the fella that was keeping Farage's seat warm? The one that I had to give a bit of a talking to at a bar in Richard Tice. Isn't he really loaded? So what is it? What did Farage say? He talked about privilege. Here it is, talking about he's utterly disconnected by class and by privilege from how ordinary folk feel. He's not even pretending any. He's not even trying. He's not working very hard, is he, to pretend that he's not being racist? Because he's surrounded by people who are incredibly rich and incredibly privileged. Didn't that Aaron Banks bloke pay for his chauffeur? I think he put him up in a flat, didn't he? Give him a house in London for a year or so, not long after the Brexit referendum. Then he knocked about with Richard Tice. It's almost like a dating game with billionaires. And yet, of course, Rishi Sunak, who's very, very rich, or multi-millionaires, these people are not billionaires. But Rishi Sunak, because he's rich, somehow doesn't understand our culture. It's funny that. What's the difference between Richard Tice and Rishi Sunak then? Can you think of one? Just picture them both, sorry. But picture them both in your head now. What could it be? Because they're both very privileged, both very rich. What could... Oh, I'm sure there's something. I just can't quite put my finger on it. 11:47 is the time. It's a funny day today, news-wise. There's a heck of a lot going on, an awful lot of news going on, but largely international, largely overseas, but not necessarily. They are not necessarily stories that lend themselves obviously or easily to the time that we spend together every morning. I've said to you on quite a few occasions that the big stories are not necessarily the big phone-in topics. And the next one, I think, falls pretty squarely into that category, although maybe I'm doing you a disservice. I refer to the decision by Benny Gantz to leave Benjamin Netanyahu's war cabinet, something which had been anticipated, rumoured, expected, desired for quite some time and in many, many quarters, but something which has now finally happened. Noga Tarnopolsky has been steering us through some of the vicissitudes of Israeli politics now for some months, and she joins me now from Jerusalem. How expected was this, Noga, and what does it mean?
Hello.
Hello.
It was very expected. In fact, it had been announced for the evening previous, for Saturday night, but it was postponed due to the hostages release. And it's been also called for by a very large public at this point for months. And the impact is difficult to gauge this early on. But what I think people should know is that while Benny Gantz and his party never actually joined the coalition, never joined the government, they were only part of the war cabinet. So this doesn't change the parliamentary balance for Netanyahu, which remains a narrow majority, but it could cause a lot of upheaval indirectly, because whereas Gantz and his partners' voices were very powerful voices for, let's say, moderation and conventional politics, now they're gone. And I think it's very possible that the first thing we'll see is a sharp, radical right-wing turn by Netanyahu's government.
Which would, I mean, in a sense, it makes Gantz's decision more confusing because he was acting as you describe it, he was acting as a sort of salve, as a brake upon the lurch towards the Smotrich.
Well, it's not. Sorry, forgive me.
No, you carry on.
I just meant it is confusing if you look at it that way, but I think he couldn't really be asked to commit political suicide by remaining in a government in which he gave the speech of a lifetime yesterday. He accused Netanyahu of torpedoing the aims of the war. I mean, really a historic speech to accuse the prime minister of that. He accused the prime minister of defeating almost all efforts to get the hostages back. So if that's how he feels, I think it would be almost an impossible ask to expect him to stay in a government and therefore carry some of the blame of what the government's doing when he feels he's not having impact.
To your point about Gantz's allegation that Netanyahu, I mean, 4 hostages were released this weekend, of course, and reports out of Gaza that 274 Palestinians, including at least 64 children, were killed in the same time period. But that point there about the accusation that Netanyahu's not done enough or much to get the hostages freed, does that tally with reports that America is now entering into almost unilateral negotiations with Hamas to get Israeli hostages freed in a conversation that Israel won't even be part of?
Yeah, I mean, I'm chuckling. The subject is obviously not funny. It's a matter of life or death.
It's a wry chuckle, Noga.
But it's a wry chuckle because I'll tell you what I think is happening. Netanyahu, yesterday, with Gantz's departure, Netanyahu already began to adopt a much more extremist kind of form of language, stepping away, as it were, from the proposal to Hamas, which Joe Biden presented a week ago and said that this was Israel's proposal. Israel had agreed to it. And so now, of course, Hamas has not said yes or no. Hamas is keeping the whole world dangling. And that has to be said. But Netanyahu appears to be trying to step away from it. And my best guess, it's hard for me to imagine that the White House would truly engage in unilateral negotiation to release its, let's say, American hostages and no other hostages. But it is very easy for me to believe that the White House would like Prime Minister Netanyahu to believe that they're contemplating this. And that's what we're, I think, led to understand, so that Netanyahu, as he considers his next steps, will have to take into account the possibility that the White House will make it evident that it is possible to release hostages if he only wanted to. Now, in terms of the very spectacular hostage release military operation that you mentioned, I think I am absolutely certain that many people were killed, but I do think we have to be very careful with Hamas's figures, which time and again have been used by almost all media, because since we have no other access, we have no access to Gaza, and the Israeli media keeps all journalists out of Gaza, what they're doing is giving Hamas the last word. But I still think we have to be careful with those figures.
Absolutely. And we must, I should also stress, rescued, not released, rescued. I mean, it was a raid designed to get them out. And speaking of media coverage, I've become quite a big fan of your Twitter feed, Noga.
Thank you.
Well, in which you most recently point out that Israel is letting Russia Today into Gaza, but not letting in the BBC, CNN, Sky News, Channel 4, ITV. That took
or
me,
myself,
or you even. Much more importantly, or you. That somewhat took me by surprise.
Listen, it's absolutely shocking. There's a feeling, I mean, that in Israel, that simply, it's not a feeling. There's a reality that really no one is in charge of media messaging. It is a disaster, and the IDF, the Israel Defense Forces spokesperson, by the way, who took up his job weeks before the attacks of October 7th and was a celebrated Navy SEAL but had zero media experience when he took up this job, they decide basically on the basis of personal preference who will get into Gaza and who won't. And it is them who have made this decision that basically we will only hear out of Hamas. We will only hear from Hamas from Gaza because they don't release their own figures. I'm not sure they're obliged to, but they don't, and they don't let any of us in. And so from the Israeli point of view, we're looking at it from the point of view of Israeli government messaging, this policy has been a catastrophe. And yes, it turns out that a guy who works for RT is palsy with people in the IDF spokesperson's office, and he got in, whereas much more serious media outlets have not.
Finally, Noga, I don't know if you can speak about Israeli public opinion as if it's a sort of homogenous phenomenon, but how is all this playing with, from Benny Gantz to the rescue of the hostages through to the increasing alienation from the international community in general, or America in particular? I mean, where is public feeling now on the ground in Israel?
Well, in terms of international isolation, as you know, Secretary of State Blinken is about to land in Israel.
Yes.
I think that the correct perception of Israel as growingly isolated is reported a bit differently in Israel, and so Israelis are much more confused about what's going on. But in terms of public opinion, something fascinating has happened, which is that when the hostages were released on Saturday to great jubilation, there was an immediate assumption, even on my part, that this could give Prime Minister Netanyahu a boost. It was one of these very rare moments of joy in a terrible period. And it has not happened in part because the released hostages, in their initial statements to their own family members, said that the protests, that they were able to see the anti-government, the pro-hostage release protests when they were in captivity in Gaza. They saw them on Al Jazeera. And so they said that this gave them strength and this gave them hope. And so instead of this spectacular release being used, somehow turning into a sense of support for Netanyahu, it seems conversely to have given some fuel to the protest movement against him.
What a tangled web we weave. Eh?
Yep.
Noga, thank you, as always. Noga Tarnopolsky there, who you can follow on Twitter and whose dispatches from Jerusalem have become incredibly valuable to us, trying to make sense, as we say, of what is happening there. And, of course, up to and including the confusion about how what we are having reported here, whether it is the numbers that we rely upon for casualties and deaths, or whether it is the perception of international isolation, the story on the ground in Israel could be quite different. There is, if you like, wiggle room on almost all of this. No wiggle room, of course, as we mentioned Russia today, on the fact that Nigel Farage once had a season ticket for that broadcaster and never once criticised. In fact, I think, was it when he was in a TV debate with Nick Clegg that he said Russia had been provoked after the invasion of Crimea? It's pertinent, of course, to the current war in Ukraine. He said Russia had been provoked and the EU had blood on its hands. That'd be nice if someone asked him about that, perhaps in his current round of promotion. I've got time for one more call. It's going to be Jazz, who's in Flint, and it is on the question of these little, well, they're not little, I suppose, if you're on the receiving end of them, but these subtle acknowledgements that people you thought were your friends or people who don't think you can ever really be British, just as Rishi Sunak can't really understand our culture. Jazz, what did you want to say?
Hello, James. Yeah, I've been working in the emergency services for over 20 years, and we were preparing for Remembrance Sunday, and a white colleague said, I don't think you'd want to take part because you're Asian. So my response was, well, in the First World War, there was 1.5 million Asian troops who volunteered. The Second World War, 2.5 million troops who volunteered. I think there were over 80,000 Asian lives that were lost during the Second World War. And I saw my granddad served for the British Army for 10 years. He never mentioned that to me. And his two brothers.
Did you hit your colleague with all this stuff?
Only partially, because when you get to my age, you kind of get used to these comments, and you thought, "Oh, I wish I'd said this." In hindsight,
the French call it esprit d'escalier. Yeah. Esprit d'escalier.
if you read the history, the factual history, and I said, well, my granddad's two brothers fought in the Second World War II.
But I mean, this is I mean, in many ways, if we were engaging in the sort of lazy name calling that Farage and his fans adore so much, in many ways, he's the one who's unaware of British culture. He's the one who's ignorant of British history. Your colleague I'm talking about he's the one who doesn't actually understand the importance, the depth of the importance of Remembrance Sunday. It's crazy, isn't it? And yet you get accused 20 years in the emergency services, born and bred in Britain, and you wouldn't really want to be there because you're brown, he's saying. Asian is just another word for brown in this context.
Oh, absolutely, yeah.
It's out there, isn't it, Jazz?
But, I just want to mention, I don't think a lot of politicians are patriotic because they put themselves first before the people of this country.
Mate, nobody current or still clinging to the carcass of Brexit. I would probably go so far as to say nobody in politics, and by which I mean the con men rather than the conned, who was in favour of Brexit, can ever really, in an honest universe, be allowed to describe themselves as patriotic, because they have inflicted untold harm upon the population, upon the economy, upon the future, upon almost every aspect of our national existence, not to mention our national status, our national reputation, while dancing around like peacocks, pretending to be patriotic and accusing other people of not being. But that's a conversation for another day. It's 12:01. 5 minutes after 12 is the time. A complete change of pace and indeed tone coming up, as we will pay a tribute to the late broadcaster, doctor and genius communicator Michael Mosley. But before that, a quick nod towards the rearview mirror. In fact, two quick nods towards the rearview mirror. Rishi Sunak, who sort of seemed to spend most of the weekend hiding, probably under his duvet, I'd have thought, and under his pillow, has come out to do a pooled clip in which the state of the Tory campaign is probably best summed up by the fact that the two main questions were about Nigel Farage's racist dog whistle, which, of course, it sounds like a Viz strip, that, doesn't it? A Viz cartoon strip. Nigel Farage's racist dog whistle. And, well, I won't tell you what the second bit was until we've heard what he had to say about Nigel Farage's racist dog whistle.
Well, it's a question for Nigel Farage what he meant by those comments. I'm not going to get involved in that because I don't think it's good for our politics or indeed our country. But what I can say is only one of two people will be Prime Minister on July the 5th, Keir Starmer or I. A vote for anyone who's not a Conservative candidate just makes it more likely that Keir Starmer is Prime Minister. So if you're someone who believes in bringing down migration, wanting your taxes cut, protecting pensions, increasing investment in our defence, or adopting a proportionate, pragmatic approach to net zero which saves people money, I'm the person that's going to deliver that from you. Keir Starmer is not, and that's the choice for people come July 4th.
And in many ways, the very last thing that you want to be asked about when you're less than 4 weeks out from a national ballot is whether or not you're actually going to be in the job for much longer before the national ballot occurs.
No, of course not. I'm energised about the vision that we're putting forward for the country. Right, this campaign is only not even halfway through yet, and I'm finding an enormous amount of support for the policies that we're putting on the table, whether it's a modern form of national service, the triple lock, plus 100,000 new apprenticeships, continuing to cut taxes for people. These are all things that people want to see. I believe I've got the right plan for the country. We're the only party willing to take bold action. That's how we deliver a secure future, and I'm going to keep taking that message to as many people as possible between now and polling day.
And that is the extent of the pool clip that pretty much certainly the juiciest bits of the pool clip that Rishi Sunak has provided today. A big interview on the BBC tonight, I think, with Nick Robinson. So that might be worth well, I'm sure it'd be worth tuning in for. 7 minutes after 12 is the time. Okay, a complete change of tone now. I when the story first emerged late last week that Michael Mosley had gone missing on holiday in Greece, I didn't have a fully formed idea of who he was. And I've realised subsequently that that's because, in my mind, he's two or three different people. I'd listened to his programmes on Radio 4 and their podcasts as well, about the one little change you can make or the little changes you can make in your life. and hadn't realised that he's the same bloke that had done the diet books. I've got a bit of a problem with diet books and air fryer books because they tend to dominate the book charts. And when you're in the book charts, that sometimes feels a little bit unfair. Obviously, it's not a position I'll be exploring in depth at the moment, as Michael's books understandably dominate the Amazon top 10. But if you weren't clear on exactly the scale of his contribution to public life and to the health of the nation, then you will be now. Because I can't really remember a response like this or coverage of this nature to the passing of a broadcaster. And by that I mean someone who's not an entertainment broadcaster. You know, I suppose if the day dawns when we lose the great David Attenborough, then you're going to see an extraordinary outpouring of reminiscence and tribute. But what I've been really struck by is the scale of his impact upon individual lives. So the coverage last week was dominated by the mystery element of the disappearance and of course by the dwindling optimism, the dwindling hope that he would be found alive. And then, as it was confirmed yesterday morning that he had been found dead mere yards from potential safety, the story went into reminiscence and tribute. Quite rightly, his wife Claire has made it actually brought tears to my eyes. When my time comes, if Mrs. O'Brien has anything half as nice to say about me as she had to say about her late husband, then I'll consider my marriage a job well done. But the tributes that have poured in have been, I would say, it's a word I use with some caution, I think they've been unprecedented. I mean, there was one that pointed out that he defied broadcasting convention. We're quite a competitive bunch in broadcasting. I'd like to think I've grown out of this habit now, but you can sometimes hear on, for example, radio programs, if a caller mentions another presenter, some presenters bridle even at that. You know, if someone were to ring me up and say, well, as I said to Nick Abbot the other night, and you go, God, why are you talking about? We're a weird bunch. And I think the nicest tribute in the context of broadcasting that I've heard be paid to Michael Mosley was from Chris Van Tulliken, who of course wrote the ultra-processed food book and who worked with Michael a lot. And he said he brought people on. He wanted other people to get gigs. He wanted other people to get work. So a tendency in my profession to try and hoover up everything that is offered to you. Not for everybody. I'm not like that. I was once, but I'm certainly not like that anymore. I'm far too lazy. But to be that generous and to recognise that a programme or a broadcast or a project could be improved by sharing the work, by spreading the load was quite rare. So, you know, Trust Me, I'm a Doctor that he did with Selaire Arsan, one of the co-presenters, said he was just so professional, but he was just so human and so passionate about what he was doing. He lived and breathed his work. He was an inspiration. There's a beautiful clip of him talking about how simple acts of kindness can prolong your life. They're sort of endorphins that are brought by doing something nice can actually have a long-term impact on your health if you do them regularly enough. And the clip involved him just taking his wife a cup of coffee in the morning. And it's just a beautiful thing. Phil Hammond, the broadcaster and doctor, talked about being given his TV break by Michael Mosley when he was invited to help present the BBC's Trust Me, I'm a Doctor. I mean, it is just an extraordinary response. Pages of newspaper coverage right across the gamut as well, from the front page of the Telegraph to the front page of the Guardian. I mean, that is an extraordinary tribute. One interview I heard this morning was the former deputy leader of the Labour Party, Tom Watson, who talked about how reading Michael Mosley's book, one of Michael Mosley's book, had persuaded him that he could reverse his type 2 diabetes. He could make lifestyle changes sufficiently profound to allow him to come off the medication which he'd been prescribed for type 2 diabetes. And Tom said a phrase that really stopped me in my tracks. And he said he was reading the book on a Kindle on holiday in Spain. And he said, he made me think that I'm not broken. He made me realise that I wasn't broken. So Tom, who has written a book himself about the lifestyle changes that he made in order to lose, I think, 7 stone in total, was one of those overeaters or one of those people whose relationship with food was a consequence of other issues and other factors, but who had somewhere deep inside persuaded himself that it was a consequence of being broken, of being a broken human being. And I can't think of a greater gift you could give to the reader of a book than the gift of believing that you're not broken, except perhaps showing them the path back to health, to heartiness. So, this is a very strange phone-in, but it's one that I really hope you will help me pull off. It doesn't have to be a big deal. Chris Van Tulliken talked earlier of brushing his teeth while standing on one leg, because the importance of balance, especially as you get older, becomes ever more acute, and again has implications and ramifications right across the health gamut. I do that, and even when the story first broke last week, I couldn't have told you with 100% certainty that it was as a consequence of the fellow that was missing in Greece, but it was an awful lot of sort of pieces slotted into place over the course of the weekend. And that's a tiny, tiny little thing. But I want you to call me now and tell me how Dr. Michael Mosley changed your life. It struck me that was the best tribute perhaps that we could pay to him. He touched so many lives. I haven't even checked Amazon this morning, but last night he had 5 of the top 5 books on Amazon because people were responding to his passing by getting out there, getting in there, and almost refreshing their relationship with him, refreshing their knowledge of him, and recognizing that the bits they'd got would perhaps involve there'd be some bits missing, filling in the gaps, getting so he had a paternal air. That's how Dan in Sussex has put it. Paternal in a lovely way. He did have a really paternal air, and he had what I call the Fred Dibner effect. I wonder how many people know what I'm talking about when I mention the Fred Dibner effect. Fred Dibner, as many of you know, was a steeplejack who was fascinated by things like engines. And by rights, he had no business being on television any more than I did back in the day. But Fred Dibner was possessed of an ability to communicate enthusiasms, a bit like Dave Myers, actually, who was one of the hairy bikers who was commemorated this weekend in an incredibly moving bikeathon, I suppose you'd call it, or mass bike ride. But Dave Myers had it as well, that ability to communicate enthusiasm. Even to people who didn't share it, you'd enjoy the enthusiasm. So you could watch Fred Dibner on the telly. You were never going to build a steam engine or dig a coal mine under your house, or indeed go up a steeple or blow up a chimney. But something about his enthusiasm for his subject matter was so contagious, it was infectious, that it made watching and listening an absolute joy. And Michael Mosley was 150% in that category when he was doing stuff on obesity, Who Made Britain Fat, the 5-2 diet. We're looking at fasting. Medical Journalist of the Year as long ago as 1995. And in this body of work, he's done that thing that very, very, very few people ever manage to do in any walks of life. But in the business of professional communication, he made the public personal. He got into people's ears. He got into people's lives, and he changed. He changed lives in ways that I think we should probably have a proper look at now. So, how did Michael Mosley? How did the late doctor and TV presenter, radio presenter, writer, podcaster? How did he change your life? What differences did he make to your life? Why would you, in many ways, like to record your gratitude? 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. It's 12:18. It's 12:19. Wonderful and kind on the front page of The Guardian. At the front page of The Telegraph, Michael So Nearly Made It, featuring a really, really lovely photograph, actually. Reports, page 4 and 5. Editorial comment, page 15. Obituary, page 21. The Man Who Changed How We Eat on the features pages. Heartbroken wife of TV doctor on the front page of the Daily Express. I can't remember the last time that all of the front pages, except a couple actually, the Daily Star and the I newspaper. They have him on the front of the I newspaper, but not as the main story. And then the Sun, and it's a testament to the extraordinary impact that he made on individual lives, more if you like than public discourse. And that's what we're going to look at, the difference he made to your life. Avtar is in Hemel Hempstead. Avtar, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, good morning. Good
Hello.
afternoon, James. This is about my son. He has special needs, complex medical needs, and for the first 5 years of his life, he wouldn't eat regular food. I used to have to process everything in a NutriBullet type of thing and give him all mushy foods. And I read an article that a parent in a school shared that Michael had written about the use of probiotics, and they used a sample of children who had autism and had remarkable results in the sense that a few of the children started to eat and even started to vocalise. My son is non-verbal, still non-verbal. I took a punt to use the probiotics that were mentioned in the article, and lo and behold, within a week, I was driving with my son. He's non-verbal. I was driving with my son, feeling a bit peckish, went into the nearest McDonald's, got some McDonald's fries. He was in the front seat with me. He literally reached over and took some fries and started eating them. And from that moment, he's been eating food, and he's literally changed our lives for the better. And we were quite emotional when we heard the news about Michael.
Of course you were. So that, he literally, his first solid food, essentially.
Yes, literally.
Because probiotics all about gut health and gut health having an impact on all manner. I think it's the next great frontier of medical science, actually. But that, on a personal level, that's an absolutely magical story.
Yeah,
isn't it?
remarkable, yeah.
And you haven't looked back?
No. I mean, my son still does have other gut issues and things like that, and other complex needs. But on that side of things, it's just made such a massive difference. And I've tried to share that story in that article with other parents, just to help, because it's definitely helped us. And
well, you've just shared it with possibly more people than you've managed to before, Avtar, which is lovely, isn't it?
Yeah.
Take care.
So thank you so much.
No, thank you so much. That was pretty big high bar to start. It's me brushing my teeth while standing on one leg. No, I'm not going to show you either. Oh God. Niall's in Shrewsbury. Niall, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello.
Thanks so much for taking the call.
You're very welcome.
I think you can look back on your life and see that there were certain defining moments that kind of changed the path that you were taking. And for us as a family, I think watching one of Michael Mosley's programs on TV was one of those moments. We weren't having the healthiest life. I think we famously drank a bottle of red wine, had a pizza every night for 365 days for a whole year.
What, even on Christmas Day?
Even on Christmas Day.
Good Lord. Fair play.
I know. There's still shops open on Christmas Day. It's crazy what you can buy. But he made everything simple to understand and really opened myself and my partner's eyes in a way that we had never thought of it before. And the journey from nearly 4 years ago to where we are now, it's crazy to think that we've become such completely and utterly different people from the path that we are going down, which is one of sickness and poor health and a general unhappiness, to be honest. But now we're just so happy and healthy.
What are you doing? What path did you follow? What sort of?
Oh well, the first problem we had was the weight loss.
Yes.
But that's we know that it's once you kind of work everything out, and that's what he helped us understand. It's not necessarily about the weight loss. It's just about what you put in your mouth, and everything else takes care of itself. And he made it quite simple to understand from a how to get started point of view. But not only that, because of him, we kind of discovered other people in the same space that have pointed things out. And before, where we'd go into a supermarket and get completely and utterly drawn in by these unhealthy things and just fill our basket full of them, we walk down those same aisles now with kind of almost disgust, because we fully understand what those things do to you because of what he started us off on the journey and what he has instilled upon us now as a family. But he's made me want to change my career. I'm looking at starting something in a similar space in health, and kind of like, giving up what I do for a living to try and do that, because I'm so inspired to try and change how we perceive food and healthiness in the world. And I just want to be a part of that now because of people like him. And he is the one who started us as a family off on this journey. And my children are going to have a much healthier and happier life than they would have done, because we're not going to be giving them potato waffles and chicken nuggets. They eat what we eat, and they absolutely love it, because, to be honest, they don't know any different. And
what was his gift for people who missed him, for people who he passed by, who didn't? What was his gift? Because a lot of people work in the field of nutrition, a lot of people work in the field of lifestyle change. A lot of what did he have that A, made such a profound difference to your life, and B, explains this extraordinary outpouring of grief coupled with gratitude across the entire British media today?
I think he was just a genuine person. It never came across like he was ever doing the job he did for anything but trying to help people. It didn't feel like he was... some people come across like they're trying to sell you something. I don't think he ever came across like he was trying to sell you anything. I think he just genuinely wanted to inform people in the simplest way possible to benefit as many people as possible.
So a proper evangelical. So almost like what you're describing to me, if this was 100 years ago, he'd sound like a missionary bringing Jesus into someone's life, because they passionately believed in the power of Jesus to improve people's lives. But this was science, not religion.
He was also honest. He used his own personal story of reversing his own type 2 diabetes, and he used himself as a bit of a guinea pig as well.
He did a tapeworm once.
Yeah, I haven't seen that.
Nor have I.
Yeah.
I just heard about that this morning. That's what I mean about the full range of his work, is that someone like you can be like neck deep in it and still find out stuff from his back catalogue, if you like, or his canon that you weren't previously aware of. So he was perfectly happy to... Well, not just happy to, but he embraced the opportunity to be his own experiments. No, that was a lovely tribute. Thank you, and Thank you. far from alone. This is from Ian. I'm 45. Dr. Michael Mosley changed my life beyond imagination. I had hypertension and was pre-diabetic, and I felt like I was failing. His books and seeing his talk in Yeovil, which was both entertaining and educational, changed me for the better. He was a gentleman and will be very missed. Quite a few of you talking about the cold, not necessarily the cold water swimming, but also cold showers. But Michael's gone the whole hog. He convinced me that my cold swimming was worth struggling through the pain. The physical and mental health benefits are profound. I'm now 3 winters in and swimming through ice chunks. Thank you, Michael. And this is nice from Andrew. Well, it's not life-changing necessarily, but it speaks to the personality, the character, I think, of the man. Michael Mosley addressed a bunch of us science teachers, James. He told us he was a big fan of ours. And I was really taken aback that someone so famous and successful could tell us teachers that he was our fan. I have to tell you, I quite like that from Ollie. He was the Brian Cox of food. Brian Cox, another one who's got what you'd call the Fred Dibner touch. But it's this the diabetic angle perhaps, and another one here from Tim. Like Tom Watson, I read his book on low blood sugar diet. I lost 5 stone off the back of one book. Still can't quite believe it. It completely changed my life. And this from Simon, in very similar territory. So a few years ago, Realising I was fast approaching 40 and being considered obese, according to BMI, a combination of my mental state and the work of Dr. Mosley helped me to turn a corner mentally and realise that I both needed and, more importantly, wanted to do something about it. The 5-2 intermittent fasting that he brought to our attention, so I tentatively started it. I just turned 39. It took 10 months, but I went from 17 stone down to just under 11 and a half. And the immense weight that I felt lifted, no pun intended, physical and mental, helped me hit 40 feeling good about myself, probably the first time in well over a decade or more. And then that notion of what he had, his demeanour in making these things accessible and his enthusiasm helped me to help myself. And of course, it's always there, isn't it? That's one of the greatest things a human being, as Simon writes, can do for another. 12:30 is the time. He didn't lecture you, he spoke to you. He didn't force you, he guided you. He didn't bamboozle you, he simplified everything. A kind, caring gentleman. It feels like I've lost a friend. And that's from Dave in Shepherd's Bush in response to the passing of Michael Mosley. It is, I think, in my memory, a response from both the public and, for once, the media, absolutely getting it right. That is like no other. And we'll return to the question of the impact he made upon you personally in a few minutes. But first, Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor, is here because Ed Davey has been launching his manifesto.
Yes, that's right, James. He's launched his manifesto today in London. It's mainly focused around...
Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Leader of the Liberal Democrats.
Just in case.
Sure, just in case you didn't know. It's mainly centred around this big offer on the NHS, £9 billion worth of extra funding there. And obviously he's talked very movingly in the past few days about how caring for his ill mum became his life. And now he cares for his very severely disabled son as well, and spends a lot of time on that. Interestingly, though, James, it's turned now in the last sort of few minutes into this new offering, which is a promise to try and rejoin the single market. He told reporters at his manifesto launch just a few minutes ago that he would not put a timeline on that, but he was angry that voters have been misled over leaving the European Union.
We are the most pro-European party in British politics. We're proud of that. We believe serious government works with your neighbours, whether it's your friends and things that are mutually beneficial, whether it's trade, whether it's tackling international trafficking gangs, whether it's tackling climate change. All these issues are international, and you should work with your partners. And, the fact that Conservatives won't is a betrayal of our country. I'm proud of our country. I'm a patriot. And there are some people in the Conservative Party who have undermined my country, our country. And that I get angry about that. That's wrong. They've misled people. So no, you can't have a time. I'm afraid that's just being frank with you, because you've got to rebuild that relationship. It's going to take time.
And he accused the Conservatives of misleading people over Brexit, saying they poisoned relations with the EU.
Regrettably, the Conservative Party have so poisoned Britain's relationship with our nearest neighbours, our allies. They've undermined trust. And when I speak to European politicians, regrettably, they don't trust the United Kingdom anymore. And how sad is that? And it's clear you're going to have a step-by-step approach to rebuild that trust, rebuild that relationship. But I believe quite quickly you get a much better trade deal than the dreadful trade deal that Boris Johnson got. That would really help our economy. It would help small business exporting. It would help farmers. It would help fishermen. It would, I think, ultimately reduce prices in the shops. I think, getting a really good trade deal would be an absolute priority. Then, allowing young people to be more mobile across Europe.
Really interesting there. He thinks it would reduce prices in shops to get a new trade deal with Britain. I'm sure that would be very popular amongst a lot of people who think, just seen inflation go absolutely through the roof. Look, it's not quite the 2019 promise to stop Brexit, is it? But it's still going to be, I'm sure, a big part of their campaign. And you've said before, James, we've not been talking about Brexit enough about this campaign, but we are today.
Not just me saying that. But you're right, it is a particular hobby horse of mine. Nesri Malik's column in The Guardian today is brilliant on the subject. It is absolutely bizarre to have something that is reaching into almost every area of our existence, particularly in terms of diminishment and decline, and the two main parties not even going there. Of course, eventually one of them will have to. So it's as if Ed Davey's position, or the Liberal Democrats' position, could almost be seen as a sort of stalking horse.
Potentially. And of course, we're trying to think about the strategy that Liberal Democrats are going for. I was told the other day that their strategy is basically for anybody within a commuter distance train of London. Essentially, that's who they're going for. The blue wall, trying to take all of those seats back that the Conservatives nicked from them in the last couple of elections. So those sort of southern seats in the south, I imagine this message of a more anti-Brexit message rather, will be very popular amongst those kind of safe, leafy commuter belt areas that just do not see the benefits of Brexit in their areas and want many people to
see what?
Any benefits of Brexit.
So where do we see the benefit? In what areas do we see the benefits of Brexit?
That's not for me to argue with you.
You're speaking as if they exist.
Well, look, there are some people that see benefits of Brexit. Some people don't.
There are some people that see fairies at the bottom of their gardens, Natasha, but it doesn't make it a political reality.
Sure.
Have we got the bloke on Question? Did you see the bloke on Question Time on Thursday who was asked to list the benefits of Brexit? Yeah. I won't push this too far because you might end up sounding like him. But I just need to qualify that you're presuming the existence of benefits of Brexit.
Some may say being able to control the number of people that come in and out was some may say a benefit. Or benefit or of Brexit.
Do you want to play a game?
Not really.
Good. I'm going to read you a story that has dropped in the last 10 minutes.
Go on.
But I'm going to leave out the party to which this candidate belongs. And I'm going to invite you to guess, okay?
Go on.
A candidate claimed the country would be far better if it had taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality instead of fighting the Nazis in World War II. He also wrote online that women were the sponging gender and should be deprived of health care.
Oof.
He thought Winston Churchill was abysmal and praised Russian President Vladimir Putin.
This is all from the same candidate, just to be clear.
Oh, yeah. This is in 2022, so it's not ancient history at all. He wrote, Britain would be in a far better state today had we taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality. But oh no, Britain's warped mindset values weird notions of international morality rather than looking after its own people. There might be a clue there. In the same month, he wrote, in Britain specifically, we need to exorcise the cult of Churchill and recognise that in both policy and military strategy, he was abysmal. And then I'm trying to find the bit. Less complaining, please, from the sponging gender. Women are subsidised by men to merely breathe.
Goodness me.
Yeah.
That's quite a rant,
Do you think there's much confusion over what party this character is likely to belong to?
I'm going to guess that might be on the slightly more party to the right.
I'm going to give you a clue. It's not the Liberal Democrats.
Is it not? Is it not? It's not the Green Party.
It's not the Green Party.
Because they did have some questionable views about birth last week, and I did wonder if maybe that would be...
Fair enough. No, it's the outfit led by the bloke who spent the weekend claiming that other people don't understand British culture and who turns out to have a candidate on his roster who thinks that Britain shouldn't have fought the Nazis in the Second World War but should have taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality.
Well, when we were speaking, LBC was speaking to Richard Tice, the former R.I.P., rest his soul, Reform leader the other day.
He's still alive, just to be clear.
To the Reform Party, perhaps not. We were speaking to him the other day, and he said, we don't need to vet our candidates because you, the media, do it for us.
Well, it's a bit late now, isn't it? It's Friday. These are now candidates. These are not.
They can still pull out.
Well, we shall see whether or not this character. Indeed. So I haven't said his name or his constituency because I've got political paranoia and I don't want to read out the full list of candidates.
He is a Reform candidate.
A Reform UK candidate who claimed the country would be far better if it had taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality.
Goodness. Well, we'll see later today. We're going to get a full list of candidates around 4 p.m. of all of the candidates for every single seat. It will be really interesting to see how many candidates Reform could actually find to put up because they were really struggling, as were the Conservatives in some areas, to find enough people to just put up on the ballot paper. And of course, you'd think the Prime Minister calling this snap election would be ready with all of his candidates, but apparently that wasn't the case.
No, and on online spending I read this weekend, Labour were better prepared for this than the Conservative Party was.
Yes.
It appears to have taken its own party by surprise when Labour were ready.
Are you referring to those graphs in the Financial Times?
Yes, I love graphs in the Financial Times.
They were really
John
stark,
Murdoch
weren't they?
does the work of the angels. And a big set-piece interview tonight for the Prime Minister.
Yeah, Prime Minister is speaking to the BBC for a panorama interview tonight. It's one of the first they are doing all of the other political leaders as well. And like I say, we've got more debates, more one-on-one as well coming up. So yes, we've got this is Manifesto Week, James.
And Keir Starmer's on with Sheila Fogarty in the next hour.
She and he are indeed.
They are.
Do you
want a Brexit benefit before you go?
Yeah, go on.
Okay.
Sorry, one from you that
No,
you
this
believe
is
is a
from
Brexit
Anne.
benefit.
Anne, who's in North Shields.
Do you concur? Or?
Well, I'll let you decide on this. You can pull this out the bag next time the question comes up. I have benefited from Brexit, James. I'm a translator and I get paid in euros, so I've benefited from the fall in the pound.
Love that.
Although I think the euro might have taken a bit of a kicking this morning with the announcement in Paris of the imminent French election.
Yeah.
So I hope that hasn't affected Anne's pay packet
I hope, Anne,
too
you're okay.
profoundly. I hope you're okay. Natasha Clark, many thanks. More from Natasha, no doubt, in the course of the day on LBC as we and that story there about the Reform UK candidate possibly not being the last one that will involve one of people hoping to run for Parliament having their past catch up with them, known in the trade as an Ian Dale. It is 12:43. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. The question of the difference Michael Mosley made to you, the impact that he had, with a little side order of, and I ask this as a broadcaster, what was his magic? What was his magical moment? His magical gift that made him so different from other presenters, other medical experts, other doctors, other broadcasters. Elizabeth's in Manchester. Elizabeth, what would you like to say?
Hi, James.
Hello,
Great
Elizabeth.
to speak with you.
Thank you.
Sorry.
Likewise.
I just wanted to pay tribute to Dr. Michael Mosley, who was such an inspiration to me as someone trying my best to work in scientific communication. He was just the way that he was able to communicate really complex or far away concepts and make them just accessible and tangible, and in a way that people were able to implement them into their own personal lives. It was really inspiring.
What is that gift? Because it's not just content, is it? It's tone and context as well.
Yeah.
So the first thing you need to do, I presume, is understand it completely, like so completely that you can begin almost disassembling it down to the simplest of building blocks, which you then use to communicate it to people who wouldn't otherwise be able to understand it.
There is that, but I think why Michael was so engaging, for me anyway, is that he actually, you felt like you were learning with him. So there were a couple of documentaries where there was one where he got like a surgical A-team together, and there was there'd be a surgical issue or a medical issue that no one was able to had really been able to help solve. And he had this team together, and you'd listen to the consultants.
I see. So there's a quest, an element of quest and journey to it as well.
Yeah. So that also happened when he, I think he took LSD.
Did he?
I remember that. But in like really controlled, in a very controlled environment to see how that would act on the body, and of course he swallowed a few. He swallowed a tapeworm and other. So he was part of the experimental part of the learning process with you. You trusted him a bit more, I suppose.
I like that. And what are you doing? Why do you refer to what's your sort of professional perspective on this?
My background is I did a PhD in chemistry.
Oh, wow.
And now I work in research development, and a big aspect of that is improving the public understanding of science. So now I work in quantum technologies, which is really complex in terms of how to bring those concepts to the public. And I always think of Dr. Mosley when trying to do my best in that regard.
So he's not, final question, I promise, he's not, sometimes, the person that popularizes a subject can be a little bit sneered at by the academic community that does it every day. He clearly doesn't fall into that category.
No, not at all, not at all. And he wasn't. His, like you said, the tone was incredibly inviting, and his approach, but he just wasn't at all condescending either. It was just very, he just had that way about him of being sweet and engaging.
Elizabeth, thank you. Sweet and engaging. You'd take that, wouldn't you? 12:46 is the time. It is 12:49. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And that is an extra. You do a double take sometimes, don't you? When a story drops, and that Reform Party candidate, well, it's called Reform UK. It's a limited company, of course, not a political party in the traditional sense, but claiming that this country would have been far better off if it had taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality. I don't want to paraphrase Mrs. Merton at this point, but what would first have attracted somebody to Nigel Farage's Reform Party if they were possessed of the kind of views that Winston Churchill was overrated? I suppose praising Vladimir Putin is less mysterious, but epic misogyny describing women as the sponging gender. But I suppose the key point that Britain would have been in a far better state today if we'd taken Hitler up on his offer of neutrality, which I presume would have sort of left almost all of continental Europe under the jackboot of fascism. But hey-ho, that's the kind of candidate that is drawn to Nigel Farage's Reform Party. You can start your clock now for Nigel Farage, despite being the leader of the party and what was he before? The honorary chairman, claiming that it's absolutely nothing to do with him, and how can you possibly hold him responsible for anything at all, ever? Or maybe he'll explain that this is the kind of character who, unlike Rishi Sunak, really does care about our history and care about our culture. We've managed to keep the tone quite light today, which is nice. It's important during moments of seriousness. But I'm particularly touched by this message from Amir, which says, James, you've made me laugh so much today with your fantastic approach. Thank you. I'm about to make you laugh even more. Here is Esther McVeigh speaking at an event in the last couple of days.
And the Conservative Party always gets the country back on its feet. We have to and I will say that again.
That, in some ways, that's more significant than the heavy stuff and the grown-up stuff. Because that's when, you say the stuff that you've been saying for 20 or 30 years. You're saying it, I presume it's at a hustings of some sort. And, it's unremarkable. It's a bit like me saying the phone number, right, on LBC. It's a bit like me saying 0345 606 0973. It's like a reflex action. It's as commonplace as breathing. It's like telling you the time. It's just something that is there as part of my constant, if you like, vocabulary of my broadcasting vocabulary. And so you have the same thing when you're campaigning. You have tropes and phrases that you just reach for without really thinking. They come to you as naturally, as I say, as drawing breath. And yet listen to the spontaneity and the speed of the response to... I always forget the technicalities. Would she still be the Minister for Common Sense? Or do all of those jobs... They don't all... I don't know. But she either is still the Minister for Common Sense or was until very recently the Minister for Common Sense. But listen to the speed and the spontaneity of the public's response to something that she wouldn't have thought for a moment was going to be anything other than business as usual.
And the Conservative Party always gets the country back on its feet. We have to and I will say that again.
Oh dear. And Lee reminds me that Farage is, of course, also the majority shareholder in Reform Limited. So this character who thinks Winston Churchill was abysmal has presumably already... sent his cheque to Chateau Farage. It's 12:53. Back to Michael Mosley and the difference that he made to your life. Rich is in Ipswich. Rich, what would you like to say?
Oh, hi, James. Nice to speak to you.
Likewise.
I just called in because I'd served in the Royal Marines Band, and being a military musician, we had an operational role, and in 2011, I got sent to Afghanistan for 6 months as the adjutant of the UK Med Group.
Gosh.
And one of the hats I had was I was a unit press officer, so whenever we got a visit from the UK, I'd sort of have to chaperone them around the place. And Michael Mosley came out. He was doing research for a documentary he was doing on how medicine on the battlefield was affecting medicine back in the UK. And from the minute I picked him up at the flight line to take him up to the hospital in Camp Bastion, I was just absolutely amazed at his interest in everything that's going on around him. To the point where I'd be chatting about something which I thought was pretty boring and innocuous to a guy like him, and he'd whip out a notebook and taking notes. And one example is I've actually got a tattoo on my arm of Vitruvian Man, and he said, "What's your interest in Leonardo da Vinci's art?" And I was just talking about the link between art and music and maths, and this notebook came out, and I started getting quite nervous because I thought, oh my God, I hope am I going to end up in a documentary, or what I'm saying going to end up in a documentary? But basically, in a nutshell, it was just the interest he had in everything around him.
What did you say? What did you say to him?
I think I just remember trying to be really factual and not trying to sort of go off piste and make stuff up. Because But
don't want to do that.
No, but when we got to the hospital in Camp Bastion, the job of the musicians and the buglers was to transfer the casualties from the helicopters to the hospital, which was just a short ride in a Land Rover. And he took one look and he said, basically, your role hasn't changed in 200 years since the Napoleonic Wars. And then he started telling me about how the first how musicians were first used as battlefield medics when a Napoleonic general told some musicians who were stood around doing nothing, pick up that gun carriage and go and pick up those casualties. And he was just a fascinating guy, and just a really relatable, nice guy. And that's the thing that stuck with me, really.
It's more than that, isn't it? There's that is an almost insatiable appetite for knowledge and understanding, like wanting to make sense of stuff around him. That's part of it, but wanting other people to come with him on that stuff is that's really rare. You don't encounter that. You're very lucky, actually. Was he who else came out? Who else can you remember coming out?
I knew you were going to ask me this.
Yeah.
We had Cheryl Cole. She was very nice.
Fantastic.
Tim Westwood.
Really? Okay.
Moving
swiftly on.
He and he was writing letters home to people.
No, seriously, moving swiftly on.
And we had Tomo, the rugby player. David Beckham came out on the tour before us, and apparently he was an absolute gem. So,
thank God you said that then. I thought we were going to have a moment.
No.
That's nice, isn't it? What a lovely touch.
It was, yeah, and it was good. Like I say, the highlight for me was, and I'm not just saying this because he's passed, but the highlight was certainly meeting him and getting to spend on and off. I was with him for about 48 hours, so it wasn't a fleeting.
No, and you can get the measure of somebody probably in that kind of in that kind of space, that kind of time. Rich, thank you. That was lovely. Last word on this, I think, to Maria, who is in Barnes. Maria, what would you like to say?
Hi.
Hello.
Hello. Got nervous.
It's only me.
Thank you so much for bringing this up. I was waiting for someone to give tribute to this man. This sorry, I'm nervous.
Don't take
So
your time.
anyway, to have this, I could talk about him for hours. He changed. I've been listening to him.
What are the biggest changes he's made to your life, Maria?
It changed my health. It changed my daughter's health. Because my daughter's got food allergies and I've got food intolerance.
Right.
And it really changed our life because following the doctors, we didn't find any solutions.
Yes.
Even to the point they suggested my daughter at 14 or 15 to start taking antidepressants, and I refused. Right. And it changed. Since when I heard he was missing on Wednesday night, I shouted, "What?"
Oh, no.
I was shocked because it's one of the most, my favorite presenter on TV.
Yes.
Like you are one of my favorite presenters on radio.
Look how you just slipped in a one-off there, Maria. Don't you think I didn't notice that? Sheila Fogarty just walked into the room. There we go.
It was an amazing,
And that's legacy. That is, I
teaching
mean, this is a sad time, but there's legacy there. I mean, your relationship with food, your daughter's relationship with food is in place for the rest of your lives, isn't it? And that's all down to him.
Yes.
What a
Every
beautiful
time I
legacy.
hear the word diet, fasting, food,
He's there.
insomnia.
And he will be alive. He'll stay alive in your mind, in your memory. Maria, thank you. I've got to go because of the time, but that's the only reason. I look forward to your second call to the show. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on Global Player, the official LBC app, where you can also pause and rewind live radio. Download it now for free from your app store or head to globalplayer.com. Coming up at 4 on LBC, it's Tom Swarbrick, but now it's time for Sheila Fogarty. 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 Now it's time for Sheila